Wanted to start off with our live stream welcome and with a welcome to you all. Welcome back. And this is our day 2 of Call on Congress. We want to thank you to those who are joining us live online on Facebook and on the Fight CRC website. Again, just as yesterday, please silence your cell phones so that won't come through during the live stream interrupting. They can hear what's happening in the room. And remember that you can follow the hashtag CONC 2019 hashtag so you don't miss a thing, both from the people at home and from here at Call on Congress. And as a reminder, you've met me before, but I'm Aubrey Thalen, and I am the Grassroots Advocacy Manager for Fight CRC. We have just a few reminders to start off the day. One thing that's changed a little bit, our caricaturist, Linda Boyd, instead of being back in the social lounge here, she will be back by the store. So feel free to visit her. It's $5 per caricature, and that donation, it's a donation of $5, will go to Fight CRC, specifically to advocacy. So you are making a little bit of a difference by getting a very nice caricature of yourself. I've seen some. If you haven't, very cute. So we are today live again on Facebook as we kick off the power of advocacy and move on to the policy roundup and hear more about the latest in colorectal cancer screening guidelines. One last note before we start on our big advocacy day is next. We are going to thank our junior advocates, which I'll invite them on up to the stage. Take a moment to recognize them. Junior advocates, feel free to come on up. Maria and Lauren will be coming up as well. They prepared at least a little something for all of us to hear. It's very exciting. No, I'm just kidding.
Thanks for the setup.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to wait. Okay, well, almost all of them are here this morning. The other 4 aren't quite here yet, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves, tell you who they are, how long they've been here, and where they're from.
Hi, I am Jacob. I am 11 years old. I'm from Washington State, and this is my 6th year coming here.
I'm Andre Brown. I'm 14. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and this is my 2nd year coming here.
Hi, my name is Ariana. I'm 9 years old. I'm from New York City, and this is my first time attending Call on Congress.
Hi, my name is Javen, and I'm 7 years old. And this is my first time coming here.
My name is Carla. I'm 15 years old. I'm fighting for my brother, and I live in New York City, Queens. This is my first time too here.
All right, the other 4 that we're missing are from Stockton, California, and they range in age from 8 years old to 12 years old. So there's 4 of them. So this is just part of it, but we've got 9 junior advocates all together this morning. We've been working on what it's like to be in meetings, getting them prepared, letting them learn to tell their story, just like you've been learning to tell your story. So this is the future of advocacy, you guys. They're the ones that are going to continue the fight for many years to come. So let's give them a round of applause.
I thought that was pretty impressive personally. I don't know. And we also obviously want to thank our wonderful junior advocates facilitators right here, Lauren and Maria. Great job. We have a little something for each of you.
Thank you.
And an extra little something. Yes, thank you for everything you do, taking care of those kids. Yes.
Thank you.
Great. So they will be around or downstairs in the 3rd floor doing some junior advocates activities. And it's a really great program. You can always talk to Maria if you would like to learn more about it. You can go to the next slide. That is me. We're going to bring up one of our advocates who you've met last night if you were at the Mix and Mingle dinner. Someone who just in this past month really helped us advance our priorities that we're going to be working on the Hill. So I want him, Chad Frack, to come on up, give just a brief outline of how he helped us in the past month and how we helped him. It was pretty mutual. It was a really good outcome. So yeah, go ahead, give him a round of applause again. Steve Harvey.
Hi, yeah. In the past, Sherrod Brown, a senator from Ohio, introduced the bill to remove the barriers, and we had an idea because we thought he was going to run for president. We thought, man, it'd be awesome. He's always been a big supporter of this group of Fight CRC. So we thought, man, it'd be so cool if we could get him to come and talk. So I talked with my wife and our daughter, who's a lot better writer than me, and I got a hold of Angie and. I says, hey, how can we do this? And she said, okay, I'm going to give you Molly's number. And Molly helped out. She's in the back there. She's got that email address and number for everyone in Washington. So if you have anything you need to get, anybody you need to get a hold of Molly. She can get a hold of anybody. But anyway, she gave us an email, and I said, should I call him? She's like, no, don't call him. Email him. I think she didn't want me to talk. But so we did. We emailed. My daughter wrote up a really good email, and me and my wife kind of helped her along, and we sent it, and we got an immediate response. And Sherrod Brown is introducing the bill once again, which is a good thing. And it's really easy. Once you get into these offices and you get to meet these people, especially the staffers and stuff, you'll see that it's really easy, and they're really receptive to try to help you out for their causes. So don't ever hesitate. Don't ever be intimidated by them. Just, they're there for you, and get with them, and if you have something you need to push forward, do it. Just don't hesitate. So really, that's it.
Thank you. And I asked Chad to come up here and just give that really brief outline of what happened with us and him during that time when we were working to get that bill introduced that we'll be talking about on the Hill tomorrow with legislative staff. We're making sure that he's the one that really makes that happen, but we facilitate that. We try and make the policy more approachable. That is our job, and I'll be talking about that throughout this presentation, which is all just to show you a little bit about more of the nuts and bolts of policy and how we work and how you all have this power, the power that Chad has to have that bill introduced. We could ask again and again, but if it's someone whose life is directly affected by that bill, so much more powerful. Your stories are the things that are powerful. You can click next. So this list is from the CDC. It was published in early 2000, and it was for the biggest health wins of the 20th century. So from 1900 to the 2000. So these are published online. CDC published it, like I said, but I would argue, and I always do whenever I'm talking about the power of advocacy, that almost every single thing on this list has some sort of policy component, something that people pushed for, something that changed the way we live by either law or policy. The best one is the first one that's really easy to understand if you grew up in the 50s and 60s, when there were no seatbelts or seatbelt laws. So now it's a given. Part of that is a cultural change, but part of that cultural change is because we changed laws and because we changed policy and because people realized there was a problem. People were dying, and they were able to say, this is something that can help fix the problem. We know how to do this. Let's make this happen. So you can click next. So we'll, like I said, pretty brief presentation here today, just to go over some nuts and bolts things regarding policy, kind of like an insider's view of how it all works. But really, this is all so that you understand more of what's going on so that your story can be even more powerful. these are just the outline of that. Go ahead and click next. So when we talk about policy and advocacy, often we get them confused or they're interchanged. And so I wanted to make sure that we kind of talk about them in the sense that most people would use them. So they go hand in hand. They really can't do one without the other. And in reality, it's similar to good policy working with good politics. So it's not the same thing, but similar. They go hand in hand. They're both necessary in the world that we live in. Policy is more about being an expert in the facts, being able to just rattle off whatever a legislator could ask you for. That is more something that Fight CRC, the people who we work with, partners, professional policy work is done with that. You all have lived experience. You have stories. You are the people who can really, really do advocacy. And that's that second point, that advocacy is about lived experience. I can't say, I had colorectal cancer, this bill would have saved my life or saved someone else's life that I care about specifically. This would save my father. That is your story. You are the expert in that. And the facts that you give while you're on the Hill tomorrow, they are important. They are very important. But your expertise is your story. That is your power. And that's something that no one can ever take away from you. And the last point I'll make is that this is a balance of both. So when I said good policy versus good politics, I think we all know, and I'll be talking about this in a slide or two, I think we all know that there are certain things about politics, and we are nonpartisan, that are really emotional. They aren't always based in a lot of sense. They're really there to kind of get people fired up. There's spinning happening, people telling you that you should feel a certain way about something. Well, good policy tries to really get what evidence, what would work best, no matter what might happen as a result of people's predilections, how people might sway on the spectrum from one side to the other. So it's got to be both. That's the world we live in. We can't just say we have a great policy. We got to be able to work with people. We got to be able to adapt. But also we should start from these really good facts. You can go ahead and click next. So just to take it down, and then we're going to bring it up, is we have a little bit on how policy can be slowed down. The first one is pretty self-explanatory. I think we all know that there's some money, whether that is anything regarding money being out on Capitol Hill or not out on Capitol Hill. There are certain things about money. I don't really need to get into it. However, when we're talking about money, sometimes in meetings you'll hear people say, well, how much money will this cost? What is the score? What is the CBO score on this bill? Those kind of things are things that you might have in your back pocket as facts. But again, your lived experience is really in that lives. So what is the cost benefit of this? Saving lives. That is the real end goal, I would say, for most of the things that we are trying to advocate for. And I think as well that, of course, money is important, but I think those lives are definitely more important. Some other things that are just really broad, can slow down policy, is immediacy. And a good example of this is things that are happening in the world. Your story is that kind of thing that is most present. It is giving you the urge to go to Capitol Hill and talk about this. And that is what we need on the Hill. We need to create this immediacy and know that these legislators need to know that this is something that needs to be fixed right away. It needs to be done. And an example of this that isn't colorectal cancer related, of immediacy. Sometimes terrible things can happen, whether in our personal lives or as a country, and there will be a policy that happens right like that. An example of that is 9/11 and all the things that happened afterwards with TSA screening. So that's something where there was something huge that happened. There was immediacy. We need to fix this. And then policy happened really quickly. So that's what I'm talking about with immediacy. And your immediacy is here. You all, your lives, you're here. You're able to do this. And then organization, this is more on our end. We try and build you up as champions. We try and prepare you. And that can slow down policy in the sense that we got to get you ready. But also, we have to be able to organize you and bring you to the hill, you know? We have to be able to organize you to call. We have to be organized to send letters. All these things are something that are really essential, can require time, but more than that, of course, if we're not as organized, you may not get to the hill. You may not get that information that is able to be taken to the legislators. And then finally, restrictions. There are certain things that happen where you might be trying to work with a government official, and they might say, oh, I can't do that because there's a restriction on what I can talk about or what I can sponsor. And that's just something to be aware of. That happens. That can slow it down because you might have the perfect person to help you out, but sometimes it's just not feasible with what regulations are in place. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is something that we'll come back to, and I really just wanted to touch on it. And if you were in the March colorectal cancer awareness breakout session yesterday, and awareness all year, you got a really deep dive in this. And we're going to be able to do this later today, where we're going to look at this in depth. You're going to get to write down, if you didn't get to go to that breakout session, a lot of your story to prepare you, because that's what we're doing. We're preparing you to share your lived experience, the power that you have, with legislators. So these are just some really kind of brief points that we want to make sure we're touching on. No need to stress about it. Like I said, we're going to prepare for this later, have you write it all down. Well, there's even a worksheet in your binder. And really, we want to make sure that there's clarity. We have those asks prepared for you. They're clearly written in your binder, and we'll go over those. Brevity, elevator pitch, really trying to make it clear and to the point. Your stories, when we talked yesterday in the large group, when you said why I fight, so powerful. You were able to share your longer versions of the stories in the smaller groups. Sometimes you do need to have that shortened version to get that point across. You might only have 5 minutes with a staffer in a hallway, and that is enough sometimes. That's not something to snuff at. And then those supporting facts and figures. We have those in your binders as well, but sometimes, you know, you might forget those. That's okay. Your stories, that's what really, really matters. We like to have those facts and figures aligned with those, but again, those stories. That last point that you can ignore numbers, you can ignore us policy people coming in and saying, this, look at this number, look at this. But when someone's standing in front of you saying that this directly impacts my life, this is how it could have changed, you can change it, legislator. That's the power that you all have. Next. So that's all I got. We do have a little time for Q&A, so feel free to raise your hand if you have any direct questions, but know that we have that advocacy training later today where we'll really go over really specifically your story, how to present it, write it all down. But I'm definitely open to questions if you have any right now. Oh, I must have done a good job. All right, great. So with that, I guess we will move on. We're running just on time, I believe, so that's perfect timing. We are going to move on to an expert panel that we have coming up, and we're going to start with our Director of Health Promotion, Andy Dwyer.
All right, where is Andre? Is he over here anywhere? Andre, let's go. Here we go. All right, everybody, so welcome to the exercise part of the show. We actually just completely talked about an expert panel, but we're going to do a little exercise with our exercise director, Andre. We did this last year. It was a wild success. I don't know if you're going to get on the top of the table. No, just kidding. Okay. So Andre's going to take this side, and I'm going to take this side. Everybody go ahead and stand up. Okay, let's do some arm rolls. What are we doing, Andre? Arm rolls. to your left. That's right. That's why I held here for a while for those. Look to your right. Oh, backwards now. Go backwards. Okay. Do some shoulders. A little bit of this. All right. Tell the person next to you one wonderful thing about them, and then please have a seat, and I will have some lovely people come to the front of the stage. All right, give it up for Andre, our exercise lead. Woo! Okay, great. So, wait, did everybody tell somebody else something wonderful about them? Or yourself? Let's do it, let's do it. Okay, great. All right, nice. So thank you guys. All right, we'll go ahead and bring it down to the complimenting to a dull roar. Okay, awesome. So we're going to be spending some time this morning talking a little bit about the update with the screening guidelines. We're really excited about the progress that has been made in the area, specifically the research, the dedicated approaches to modeling, really looking at informed decisions around guidelines, and specifically the work that ACS and others have done in the area, as well as what this means for USPS TF guidelines and the impact. So as all of you know, yesterday when we talked about the early age onset work, we had a slide that spoke a little bit about screening guidelines. Last year, Ann Zauber was with us to share some perspective, but today we're going to actually have some perspective from a couple different vantage points. But we are really, again, excited about the direction, the movement, the type of research that's being done to look at targeted types of approaches for screening, and then also looking at the impact of on-time screening, and then ultimately the impact of looking at possible identifying early age colorectal cancer, as well as the average risk population and what it means for screening guidelines. So super excited to have a really dynamite group of folks who are going to be joining us today. So if I could have Lisa Richardson, Ann Zauber, and Sylvie Balzora, please go ahead and join me here at the podium. We're going to go ahead and get started on some shared discussion around the different types of screening approaches, the guidelines, which one of our agencies are utilizing, what types of screening. Yes, I said join us. Yes, Lisa and Ann and here comes the lovely Ann Zauber as well, Lisa Richardson. And if we could get Sophie on deck, if she could please join us. I think she's still out, maybe having some chat in the hallway. Oh, there she is, making an entrance. Fabulous. She's got like 3 minutes. She's got like 3 minutes. That's right. She has 3 minutes to bring up to the podium. I love it. So we're going to actually talk a little bit about the different perspective from different folks around screening guidelines. Lisa Richardson is going to be sharing from the CDC and sharing perspective as one of our public health agencies, and talking a little bit about the work that's being informed by the CRCCP program, which actually you guys are all going to be talking about, learning more about from the advocacy front. Ann Zauber is going to be talking to us a little bit about the basic science and the work that's been helping to inform the guidelines as well. And then we'll have Sophie also share her perspective as an assistant professor from the New York University Lancome Health. And you are representing, Sophie? The American College of Gastroenterology. Yes, American College of Gastroenterology as well. So those folks have been really long-time partners as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. But I guess what I want to say this morning is I want us all to listen with the type of ear around the perspective of what informs guidelines, how guidelines are built, what are the policy, and then what are the public health initiatives. But I think it's really important for all of us to not only understand what the guideline tells us, how it's derived, how they're being formed, and as advocates, what is your work in this specific area? So we're going to have time for some discussions, for some Q&A as well, but I really want to hear some of the balanced opinions and approaches about what's going on in this field, because it's exciting, but it's actually more than meets the eye. So we're going to have the different perspectives. We're going to have some time for sharing as well. And I think I will offer up our first presenter. And I think, Sophie, are you our first? Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so we'll get Sophie's, is that correct? We're good? Okay. So let me actually share a little bit about Sophie. Sophie is an assistant professor, again, at the New York University Langone Health Public Health Relations Group. and she's also representing AGA this morning. ACG, sorry, ACG. She serves as the Associate Director for the Faculty Development and Mentorship Program at NYU Division of Gastroenterology. She is focused her academic efforts in improving physician engagement and enhancing the patient experience through the use of objective, structured clinical exams. As chair of the Public Relations Committee of the ACG, Dr. Bolzora's primary goal is to disseminate the college's messages of the importance of colorectal cancer awareness to the general public and arm its members with the tools to do the same. She's also a member of the ACG's Minority Affairs and Cultural Diversity Committee and serves as a patient education subcommittee of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. She's a of the National Scientific Advisory Committee and is a faculty advisor of CCF's Greater New York Chapter Fellows Education Committee. So Sophie, we're really excited to have you share the perspective of one of the leading gastro societies' perspectives around colorectal cancer screening and guidelines. So help me in welcoming Sophie. Okay. And we are going to go ahead. Do we have clickers this morning? Okay, perfect. We'll just have you do this, I think, and we're good to go. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. So I love the sea of blue, so I tried to match. Hope I did a good job. I didn't paint my nails, though, so. We're going to have a lot of different perspectives today. I'm kind of coming from the doctor-patient relationship perspective, right? So I'm going to go through things that we talk about when I'm just talking to a patient in the office. It's just now going to be a larger crowd, but kind of who we screen, when we screen, why we screen, that sort of thing is what we'll go over. So I'll be talking briefly, and then the other two speakers will go into more detail about the guidelines, and then at the end, we'll have the panel discussion if you wanted to ask specific questions about this talk. So what does it mean to undergo a screening test for colorectal cancer? So, a lot of cancers we do have screening tests for, but the unique part about colorectal cancer screening is that we're able to actually prevent colon cancer from occurring. So when we think about lung cancer screening, when we think about prostate cancer screening, breast cancer screening, the main goal there is really detection, right? We're finding something that's already there. And so what makes colorectal cancer screening so unique is that we can actually prevent the cancer from occurring. So there's a lot of data that tells us that screening absolutely saves lives, right? That's unequivocal. The mortality from colorectal cancer has definitely been decreased, thankfully, from screening methods. So we can't stress enough the importance of screening. Of course, there's two different types of screening, which I think most of the audience is well aware of. There are tests that can prevent colon cancer from occurring, like I already mentioned. And then, of course, there are tests that can detect its presence. So why is colorectal cancer screening so important? So of course I already said that screening saves lives. And the way that it does that is, particularly for prevention methods, is that most cancers start out as a precancerous polyp. Right? So not all polyps that we find on colonoscopy are precancerous. A very, very, very small snippet of polyps actually have cancer cells in them. But for those precancerous polyps, we can remove them in real time during colonoscopy and actually prevent cancer from occurring. So generally, as a physician, I would much rather prevent a colon cancer from occurring than finding one and then having to do something about it. But for colorectal cancer, if it's found very early, people do very well. So the earlier we can screen in terms of when people are due for screening, the better. So of course, we recommend that people don't delay and get screened appropriately, and we'll go into the ages at which people should begin screening shortly. So like I said again, can't stress it enough, prevention tests are preferred because we can prevent colon cancer from occurring. So what are the recommended screening tests? So what I will present is what the American College of Gastro recommends, the United States Preventive Task Force recommends, among other societies that we have. And these are kind of what I go through with patients when I see them face to face. So when I talk about average risk patients, sometimes in the office people say, am I low risk or no risk for colon cancer? And I say everybody is at risk for colon cancer, right? So when we divvy up patient groups, generally we say people are either average risk or high risk. There's not really no risk or low risk, right? So here I'm going to focus on the average risk patient. When I talk about the average risk patient, I'm talking about patients who have no family history of colon cancer, particularly patients who have a family history of colon cancer in a first-degree relative. So we're talking about brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, and children. And then breaking it down further, we're talking about patients who have a family history of colon cancer under the age of 60 are at particularly increased risk. So average risk patients obviously have no family history of colon cancer, no personal history of colon cancer. In addition, patients who have Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, those are patients who are at increased risk for colon cancer potentially. So those do not fall into the average risk category. And then finally, people who have genetic mutations that may predispose them to colon cancer and other cancers are not considered average risk, right? So for patients who are average risk, we recommend as the most preferred prevention test is colonoscopy, right? So colonoscopy is recommended every 10 years for people who are considered average risk. So when I say every 10 years, that assumes that the colonoscopy that we do is normal. We don't find any polyps or any other abnormalities that we need to follow up on. So that's recommended to begin at age 50. For patients who are of African descent, we recommend beginning at age 45. And the reason that the American College of Gastroenterology and others do recommend that is because it's been found that patients who are of African descent actually have a higher risk of colorectal cancer. And not only do they have a higher risk of colorectal cancer, they actually have a higher mortality rate from colorectal cancer. So for those two reasons, we actually recommend beginning screening earlier in patients who are of African descent. I think that's something that has not really been well disseminated in communities, so please bring this back to those that you know who are of age to get screened. So when we talk about detection tests, the preferred detection test is called a FIT test. The goal of the FIT test is to look for hidden blood in the stool, right? So hidden blood is that you can't see with the naked eye. The test is very simple. It's non-invasive. You put some stool on a card. They give you explicit directions in the envelope. You send it in the mail. And basically, if the test is negative, it's recommended that you do it every year. If the test returns positive, the next test is a colonoscopy. A positive test, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that there's colon cancer. It just means that there's blood coming from somewhere in the colon that needs to be investigated. So again, this is not a test that's recommended for people who are of high risk. It's just for average risk folks. And then some alternative tests include a flexible sigmoidoscopy, which is basically an abridged colonoscopy. So flexible sigmoidoscopy uses the same camera, and it goes into the large intestine just to look at a portion of the large intestine. It doesn't look at the entire large intestine as the colonoscopy does, but it is looking for polyps. So if a polyp is found on a flexible sigmoidoscopy that is precancerous, the next recommended test, of course, is colonoscopy. And the goal of the colonoscopy in that setting is to look at the rest of the large intestine that hasn't been seen to see if there's any additional polyps that need to be removed. Sometimes this test is complemented by a FIT test, which looks for the hidden blood, because it may catch things that are found in the area that the flexible sigmoidoscopy doesn't see. Other tests we have available include a virtual colonoscopy or a CT colonography. The goal of that test is to look for very large polyps or colon cancer. So the test is less invasive. It does require you to drink the preparation, unfortunately. And if that test is positive, then again, next test is colonoscopy. And then finally, the one that probably has the most advertisements because it's on television is Cologuard. And that test not only detects hidden blood in the stool, but also looks for cancerous cells in the stool. So basically, when we have a bowel movement, the stool can be coated with cells that shed from the lining of the large intestine. And some of those cells might be abnormal. And so that's what the Cologuard captures, right? So if the Cologuard test is positive, next test is colonoscopy. And that's recommended to be done every 3 years. So the thing that you've probably heard me saying over and over again is if any of these other tests other than colonoscopy return positive, the next step is to find out why it's positive, and that's done with colonoscopy. So because that's the common theme, the best test, quote unquote, is considered colonoscopy. Because like I said, it has that dual benefit of prevention, right? Finding precancerous polyps, removing them in real time, and also detecting colon cancer early should it be found. So, you know, when I'm talking to a patient in the office, I often say the best test is really the one that gets done. But the caveat is it's really the best test that gets done properly, right? So sometimes we find that people do a FIT test or people do a virtual colonoscopy and it's positive, but then they don't follow through with the colonoscopy. So, you know, it's really an important piece of the puzzle. It's totally fine if people opt not to do a colonoscopy for whatever reason they choose, but with these alternative tests, it's crucial to remember that a colonoscopy must follow if the test is positive. So just to briefly touch upon the ACS guidelines, which I think others will talk about in more detail. So last year, the American Cancer Society changed the guidelines to start screening in average risk folks. And we talked about average risk as those who don't have a family history or other risk factors, like I mentioned, to start at age 45 instead of 50. And the reason for this was because we were seeing that the good news was that people over the age of 50 were getting screened in higher numbers, and the incidence of colorectal cancer was decreasing in that population. But conversely, people who were under the age of 50 were actually having a higher incidence of colorectal cancer. So the reason for this increase is not yet known, but it's definitely something that's more of, it's not just an anecdotal thing, it's really something that's been observed and is a new phenomenon that we're trying to figure out. So in order to capture more folks, ACS amended the guidelines to start screening at age 45 instead of age 50. For people who are over the age of 75, the guidelines have essentially stayed the same for ACS and is in line with others. But the key difference is starting at age 45. And like I said, the impetus was because we're seeing people who are much younger than the age of 50, who potentially have no family history, who are now having colorectal cancer in higher incidences. So I've given you a lot of information in a short period of time, but I do want to just kind of consolidate everything and go over the most important things that I want you to remember today. I think obviously this is a very well-educated group who's been affected by colorectal cancer personally, or loved ones have been. But I think it's important to go home with this information and give it to people who may not be as well educated about the guidelines and the facts about colorectal cancer. So first of all, I tell patients they obviously know their body much better than I do. So know your body, know the symptoms, don't ignore them. I think especially because we know that colorectal cancer can affect people of any age, we should not ignore symptoms. I think the younger we are, the much more easily we can ignore things and write them away. People with a family history of colon cancer, multiple risk factors, genetic mutations certainly are at increased risk and should be screened earlier. The symptoms that we shouldn't ignore include blood in the stool, new abdominal pain, weight loss that you didn't intend to have, and change in caliber of your stool or frequency. And of course, screening saves lives, and please encourage people not to delay and get screened at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Awesome. So we just learned in the hallway that Sophie's a fairly new mom, so congratulations on that. Yay. So we're really excited, and thank you for sharing that information. I think that would have been very helpful for the GAC to really continue to dominate Family Feud last night. But anyway, just saying, there were some fantastic times last night. But I do think the ACG had been longtime friends of Fight CRC. It's fantastic to have one of the professional and several of the professional agencies really connected to this work. So thank you so much for all of the great work as well, for the real commitment to the cause. We're actually going to have now join us Ann Zauber. He's actually going to talk, actually it is Lisa Richardson. I just missed, thank you ladies for keeping me straight. So Lisa, Lisa, going back and forth. We're going to have Lisa share, I think we had the provider, patient perspective, Sophie really sharing the types of modalities, talking a little bit about that interaction. We're actually having Lisa share also the CDC's perspective and some of the general feeling of the public health community and giving a little bit of that perspective and vantage point as well. So I'm going to talk a bit about Lisa as a longtime a little bit, just a little bit. Oh my gosh, she's so humble. So Lisa is the longtime, she's responsible for the leadership and direction for the scientific policy and programmatic issues related to 4 national programs at the Center for Disease Control, Prevention and Control Program. So the CDC has probably been one of the most effective and largest policy makers, and in terms of really looking at your states and interventions, the CDC has really helped framing a lot of those issues, and Lisa is their fearless leader. She's also been a longtime advocate of Fight Colorectal Cancer, the National Colorectal Roundtable, and she's currently part of the leadership for the National Colorectal Cancer Control Program, the National Breast and Cervical Early Detection Program, and the NCCN Control Program, and the National Program of Registries. So she oversees a well-developed research agenda, which includes the National Cancer Prevention and Control Research Network. And Dr. Richardson has authored and co-authored more than 100 peer-reviewed journal articles on treatment, patterns of care for breast, skin, health policy, access-related issues, and system-related issues. Blah, 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 blah is what she just said. I did not say that, Lisa. I said you're a pretty big deal. Big deal coming to the stage. Blah, blah, blah. But I really want to have Lisa come up now and share some perspective as well based on where we are with the CDC's work. And we'll then punt to Ann Zauber. So big hug here.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. All right.
We're friends.
We're friends.
Thanks, everybody. I just wanted to say that I'm here from the government and I'm here to help, okay? You like that, right? So I am a senior participant. I can't say the word advocate, but I'm a senior participant. This is my second Fight Colorectal Cancer event. I came last year. And you guys are some of the most energetic people, so y'all can see me. Sorry. A bit short. In any case, I think you guys are some of the most, energetic advocates out there, an energetic group of people out doing the work. I just went to the zero out prostate cancer, and it was the same kind of energy in the room. So I really love coming to do these things. Just to share a little bit about my background, I am a medical oncologist and slightly older than I look. When I started in 1992 as a fellow, the only therapy we had was 5-FU and leucovorin, and that was it. And it was still called stage D colon cancer, not stage 4 colon cancer. So we've come a long way, and I've met a lot of stage 4 patients in the audience. And, back in the day when I trained, the life expectancy was 6 months. And so we've come a long way in colorectal cancer. And the uptake of screening to prevent, as was said earlier, really, who wouldn't take an opportunity to prevent something, right? But a lot of people either don't know or aren't interested. And I think a lot of that has to do with our inability to explain what this is to people. Because why wouldn't you be interested in doing something that could save your life and prevent a cancer, right? So it behooves us as public health. That's just not what I'm talking. And thanks to the previous speaker for saving me, because I was like, I was supposed to talk about screening guidelines. Okay, when you guys get interviews, this is what you do. You answer the question you wish they had asked you, not the one they asked you, right? Okay, because you guys are actually experts at this stuff. You've had a lot of media training, right? I know. Oh my God. Anyway, but I still think after the presentation, the one coming next, this one sort of fits in. So what I'm going to talk about, which button? The top, the one that goes up? It should be to this. So here you go. Okay, this was me about 2 hours ago, so I probably should have put one in there with me taking a Valium or something, right, to calm myself down. Anyway, I heard that. Who's laughing like that? I love it. I do that. Okay, when other people are talking. But anyway, I forgot people are online. Sorry. Hey, I'll try to keep it straight. Completely forgot. Awesome. All right, next. So what I'm going to talk about, and actually I pulled this back out of my slide set because when I became the director 4.5 years ago, my question to our policy people in the office is, what is Congress asking us? When we go and talk to advocates, we go and talk to policy people on the Hill or anywhere else, what are the questions they're asking? And so you can't really answer that question if you don't know what it is, right? It's sort of like the end, you kind of have to know where you're going to get there. And so a couple of the questions we were being asked constantly was, what are you doing with that money we're giving you? I said, that's a good question. And, well, I mean, it is. And how many people have you actually reached with that money? Because when you go talk to people, they're asking you, so in whatever state you're living in, how many people have colon cancer? How many people die of colon cancer? If you have a program at CDC, how many people have you reached in that state? And those are legitimate questions. The answer might be, I'll get back to you on that, but that's one of my answers. But the question is really, what is our reach and how are we spending the money? And how can we design something that would get us there? And so just to speak briefly about what I was asked to talk about, our guidelines. So I tend to be a lumper and not a splitter, right? So there are a ton of things that we agree about with colorectal cancer screening, right? I would say the amount that we don't agree on is maybe 10%, the age to start, the age to stop. But there is no doubt that we know that colorectal cancer screening is effective and that it works and it prevents cancer. So the differences I see are, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force says start at 50, end at 74. They are now looking at it again. I wouldn't be surprised if the age range came down when they do it again. I expect to see something within a year or so because they've already posted their questions and gotten feedback on the questions. The next thing they do, the last go around on the colon cancer screening recommendations took a year to consolidate all the comments. They'll put the preliminary thing up, I hope, in the next year or so because they have already started and I think, Ann, are you going to talk about some of that later? But anyway, so the real thing we're looking at is really the big perspective out there, and that's what I'm going to try to show you. I took most of the data out. I could wow you with the data, but it would bore you to death. Okay? I'm bringing it. You're bringing it? I love it. This is a great panel too, by the way. Yeah. So what you see is that we've evolved over time. So we started out with a demonstration project. Believe it or not, I was there in 2005. I've been in our division now about 20 years, and I've done pretty much every job. So I know where every single body is, right? And so, but the first phase, we paid for screening in that program, and it was successful. But as you see at the bottom, it had a very limited reach. So the next go is something that when I was listening in online yesterday, was something that Angie said. Angie said, it's all about systems and changing the systems and making policy changes. And so that's exactly where we went in 2015, is how can we get into health systems to change how the work is done and to make it permanent? And then how can we deliver the screening and diagnostic services in 6 places so we can see how the system changes impacted the screening. But the main focus of this project is how can we change the system, and that would be where is our reach within the places that we fund. And so as you see there, as I said, collaborating with health systems through the state health departments mostly. We're actually funding 6 universities this go around to see what the difference is, but using evidence from what works, not evidence, in healthcare clinics with the goal of increasing rates. And so we use the community guide recommendations from CDC. And this is where the spread is over the nation. And we do have one tribal organization. And so this is really a simplified model in pictures of what we're aiming to do to increase the screening in clinics. We go into the clinics, we assess and get a baseline rate, working with partners externally to get the work done, and then the data reporting, and our ultimate outcome is increased screening within those health systems and within those clinics where we know what the denominator is, like how many people of age-appropriate people are there, the denominator. And so this is the model that we use. We focus on a high-need population, partnerships to help with implementation inside and outside the health system, public health and primary care. And then the thing we're doing there with the dollar sign is an extensive economic evaluation. Someone mentioned, I think Aubrey mentioned earlier, the return on investment. So if I do X number of dollars in X number of clinics, what do I get back for that? And that really is the business case. And, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on which side of the coin you're on, medical care in this country is a business. And so you have to bring the business case to those people. And there's no shame in saying that. You just have to understand what you're up against if you're going to talk to people, right? You need to know what their point of view is. Actually, there's a really cool quote from, what's his name? Warren Buffett's partner. You never hear about him. I can't remember his name now. It just escaped me. Dang it. Anyway, what he says is you should know the other guy's point of view better than he knows his point of view when you go to talk to him, right? I'm going to remember that guy's name in a minute. But old age, right? But seriously, so you got to understand where other people are coming from when you go and talk with them, so you can sort of speak their language and use their terminology to your advantage. And so here are the evidence-based interventions. You guys have most of you have probably seen some of these. Supporting activities. Small media is actually in the community guide, but everybody uses small media, brochures, sending stuff out like that. So we decided that that would be a supporting activity, not a main activity. And many of them have already put some of these things in place. And so as it says there, I can't see either, but the ultimate goal, but getting old is hard, isn't it? So at the end there, it says increasing screening rates for everyone. So what does it look like? So we went through this, so something unusual and probably anything people do is we started the evaluation the moment that the program hit the ground. Usually we see how things work in our programs a year later, 2 years later, people are having, struggles getting started. So we know from day one how this thing went. And I'll show you the data, which means we collected screening data as we went. And so we know from day one how the implementation went, the barriers that people suffered through, as well as the goodness that happened out there as well. And so these are all the variables. And this should be in your packet, I believe. Is that right? Most of this is in your packet. I kind of had a brainstorm on myself last night and changed a few things around. But what we're trying to do is come up with standard ways of collecting data in the clinics that can be exported to others, such as measuring screening rates and guidance document on the end. Any clinic that wants to implement evidence-based interventions in their clinic, whether they are in our program or not, can get this document, download it, and go do it. And so my goal for our program is that we just don't serve our funded programs, we actually serve everyone. And that sort of kind of stretches the mind sometimes. But really, why are we spending tax dollars if we aren't benefiting everyone? And so this is the way they report the data. It's all web-based. They could actually report it daily if they want to. We don't want all that, so we get it every 6 months to have a look at what's going on. And it's close to real time. We're about 6 months off, since that's how often they report the data. So program year one, this is how we do it. As we move along in the program, the ones who were funded in year one will bring others on. And it's another opportunity to look again at economies of scale. Do you have the thing in place? Can you get it faster? And we do have some data that shows clinics in the same health system that were chosen second got it done faster, rates went up faster. And so I won't be showing much of that today, but it does work. And so what have we done? And so as I said, what is the reach of the program? What are they using? Have screening rates increased? And does it vary by clinic setting? And what are the things within a clinic that we can identify that helps or hinders implementation and screening? And so again, you guys know this better than anybody. Partners are critical. With the amount of funding that we have, it's impossible that we're going to be able to do the full job by ourselves. So as you see the activities over there, professional development, provider education came from outside. 80% by 2018 was critical in a lot of these clinics to getting, that's the roundtable initiative, small media, and quality improvement activities where you sort of do the total quality improvement from industry. You can actually do that in a healthcare clinic as well, and that tends to work. You examine the problem, see what the problem is, and then you go in and fix it, right? And so in our division, we've actually trained a couple of Six Sigma teams as well within our division to look at processes that we're doing the same as everybody else in the world to sort of improve those things and be more efficient. So here you go. So as of the end of year three, we're just finishing year four now, so this is about a year old. We reached about 1.1 million age-appropriate people. So now if you ask me what's the reach, I can tell you we have 218 health systems, 681 clinics, almost 6,000 providers. And previous to this, we couldn't say any of those things, which, it's kind of, well, what do you know, Lisa? Well, let me get back to you on that. So that's not an acceptable answer for Lisa. I need to have something that I can present to people and talk about what we've been doing. And here is a graph of, the success. We've sort of was leveled out because, the goodness happened in the beginning, but we're leveling out. But as you see, clinics are still coming on and people are still being served. High risk or underserved clinic, that's what we do at CDC, is serve the underserved. 70% are federally qualified health centers. 28% have high uninsured rates, which greater than 20% is how we define it. And FOBT fit is just over half of the primary screening modality used. And here's the success. Over those clinics that were enrolled in year 1, by the end of year 2, and year 3 data will be coming fairly soon, it's 8.3 percentage points from baseline at the end of year 2. And so, you know, what we're doing appears to be working, and we've actually got some data on what is working. And this is, I thought this one was pretty cool, but if you look there, the line is going up. The more interventions you put in place in a clinic, the higher the increases in rates in a clinic. And so you'll see at the very end, if they have all 4 evidence-based interventions, their screening increased by 25 percentage points. And so again, previous to this evaluation, we could not have told you what is the benefit of 1 evidence-based intervention, 2, 3, 4. Now going back and looking at the data, we're going to try to see which one was the most critical one. But it looks like for the best results, you need all 4. And here are the things that sort of showed FOBT had the biggest increase. These are the factors that show the most improvement in rural clinics that we're working in. This is now an area of emphasis for CDC and every other agency out there is rural health. That's where we had the largest increases. And on the end there, it's was it a clinic or a hospital? And as you see, hospitals had fairly high rates to start with. So I would have expected to get more improvement in places where they're lower, but not necessarily, because these are clinics that have don't have all the resources that others have. And so this is what we've learned. Screening rates increase, but there's some, and this is the other thing about evaluation and looking at evidence-based interventions. You know, what is the secret sauce in something being translatable to another place, right? Or another population. And in this particular case, the tenets of the model I showed you, staying true to the CDC model, the screening policy in the clinic. If a clinic had a screening policy in the clinic, that was wonderful. Having someone in the clinic who was a champion of colorectal cancer screening made a huge difference, as well as I just showed you, the number of evidence-based interventions or things that work and things we know work and that are recommended to be used. The more those were used, the better off people were, even if they already had evidence-based interventions in place. So this is one of my mantras. If a tree falls in the woods and there's nobody there, does it make a sound? Well, scientifically it did, but nobody heard it, right? So this is, who was that? Yeah, never mind. I heard that. So one of my, I know, like I said, a mantra in soapbox is if you don't ever get the results out, nobody ever know what happened and what you did and what the successes were. So let's, kick it up a notch and try to get the stuff out. So we have this, all of these things are on our website if you want to know the successes we've had, the clinics we work in, the manuals that we've developed. You can all go there and find these things. Got to find a better way to get the stuff out, though. Communications has been one of my huge pushes as a division director, because as I just said, if you don't get the work out that you're doing, how are people supposed to know what you're doing? So if you go to our website, www.cdc.gov/cancer, you'll see that the best comment or compliment we ever got was, it doesn't look like a government website. I was like, awesome. It's beautiful, and it's web enabled, it's mobile, it's everything. CDC's gone mobile first, digital first, so everything has to be good for digital and for mobile. And anyway, you people in the room that know all that web stuff knows it's a beautiful thing. But you have to plan for it, right? You just can't say because if we just slapped that on there, it would be like all over the page, and you'd be moving it around trying to find the thing you wanted. But yeah, so the website is beautiful. We've now gotten to the place where I feel pretty good about the thing, because it was. You seen that commercial where the frog is in the bathroom and he says you can't unsee that? I know you have. It's a toilet paper commercial. Anyway, I can't remember the toilet paper, but I cannot. So they didn't do a very good job with the branding, did they? But anyway, he says you can't. There's some things you just can't unsee. And so that was one of the things with our website. I'm like, you cannot unsee that. But anyway, so what have we done? Really this evaluation, I think, is the way we're evaluating all of our programs now. We have to know what's going on the ground at the time that it's happening, not 2 years later. Otherwise, we can't make any differences. The work that we've done has strengthened our accountability to Congress and to the public. We just need to do a better job letting people know what we do at CDC. And the reason I like to come out and do these types of events is that people don't know that CDC does cancer. They think it's all done at the NIH and the NCI. But we have quite a few cancer activities, and I could go on forever talking about all the work we do. But I think it's incumbent upon us as the people creating this stuff to get it out there for you guys to know about it, or the public in general. And then how can we inform future planning and policy making by the work that we've done here? So I found this quote about 2 years ago, and I think this is what you guys are doing in this room. The best way to predict your future is to make it, right? If we're going to sit around and wait for others to make it for us, you might not like what they're making for you. So, which is why I tend to be more proactive than a lot of people at CDC. It's like, we got to go get that thing that we think is best to serve the public. And it really isn't about us at all. It's about you guys. It's about the people that support us and the public. So at the end of the 80 by 18, how are we going to get there? I mean, it's sort of like in the air, right? I saw your session yesterday on the, how do you do it all the time, not just in March. I think March is like a call to action, but the other 11 months, we have to be everywhere all the time, doing it all the time, which I'm sure most of you guys do because you're living it every day. I think this might be the last slide. And so action, this is one of my favorite little, I was having a very bad day one day. So I went on the web going, what kind of inspiration can you find? Because, a lot of the work you do and a lot of work you do is done in the dark. It's not done in the light, right? And you actually get discouraged because you don't think things are going so well, right? And so you say to yourself, I'm just going to quit. I had that thought yesterday. I was coming up here on the airplane, looking out the window going, what's the point, right? And not thinking about jumping out. Woo, no, never. Life is very good, no matter what it looking like, to me. So, but action, it really is the way to all success, and that's what you guys are here for. Imperfect action is better than perfect inaction, because if you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't move, you don't go. All of those things. And it does sound like a cliche. Like people ask, I said, people think I'm a Pollyanna sometimes, but I'm not really, because I work really, really hard, and you guys do too. But if we don't work, we're not going anywhere. It's like, manna from heaven, right? God said, go get it. He didn't bring it to them every day, right? He gave it to them, so they weren't hungry. But they couldn't, they had to go get the manna. And so then the last thing I'll say is success consists of going from thing to thing with enthusiasm, right? So at the beginning I needed more coffee, but by the time I got to the hotel yesterday, I was refreshed and going, I'm going to keep moving and keep going because that's all you can do, right? So it took me about 20 minutes to get over it. I don't stay mad long, so which is also a good trait. But we got to keep moving and we got to keep working. And this is me trying to be like a millennial or something like that. But anyway, you saw her earlier in the coffee cup. So that really is me in the coffee cup first thing in the morning. But I really do appreciate everything you guys. I appreciate everything everybody does. Notice she has wrinkles in her face. Did you see that? That's right. When I made her without wrinkles, she didn't look like me. I was like, oh my God, I got to put some wrinkles in that. So she didn't look like me. But that's supposed to be me when I had more hair. I tell you, getting old is hard. So, I appreciate everything you guys do, and I look forward to your questions afterwards. But it's always a pleasure to come. And next year, maybe I'll tell a story next year, an allegory or something. Excuse me, if I'm invited. So I have to get invited first. So, but thanks a lot, y'all.
So those of you who have cell phones, you know who you are. That would be everyone. Go ahead and take them out, and I want you to actually type this in, the community guide and CDC. So You do have information in your packets about the CRCCP program. Lisa did a beautiful job of really highlighting how do we really get interventions into play. But seriously, take some time, because I don't know that a lot of times folks really think about the evidence-based interventions, and I didn't really stress that enough to beginning, about the amount of actual time that it really takes to put in the structures to get people to screens, to treatment, to tests, doing the sort of things that we know work. Put it on your phone, look at it, get familiar with the site. There's the different drill down for the different types of cancer. So there's breast, colorectal,
and cervical.
and cervical as well. So really seriously, when you guys get ready to go on the Hill, today you have some time, check out what's on there, because it really is fun. I got a beta test the CDC site like a half a century ago or something. That makes you sound really old. It's 5 years, but half a century actually sounds worse. So yeah, but we got to really beta test this site and really try to make it usable, and I think Lisa's exactly right. But those evidence-based interventions, they're at your fingertips. So join your state cancer coalitions, join your, know what's going on in your state with your CRCCP program. When you meet with your legislator, have some things available. Talk about what's going on in your state. That's all there. The details there about what the IT is, also within your folder as well. But it's an amazing program, and as Lisa said, it really is making a difference in our communities, and we really got a chance to see that. Go ahead, Angie. You know what? Actually, I'm going to move that, Lisa. Talk about evidence-based interventions, because I'm going to say what Lisa said right behind it.
Well, actually, I did try to modify. Thanks, Angie. It really is where we do research on how to deliver services, and then it gets what's the word? Consolidated, looked at and consolidated, and then we pull out the best parts that work, and that's all it is. The evidence is based on research. So I usually try to say, kind of got carried away, sorry about that, putting things into place that work, or actions that work, and that's what evidence-based interventions are. Is that good? Is that okay?
Right. And I think it's all about testing it, trying it out, and seeing if that evidence, and if there's enough evidence to show that it really is effective over a period of time and consolidated, as Lisa said, and then disseminated, part of the channel.
So the most important thing about what I said at the very beginning is that people put these things in different places, different documents, but do they actually work if you go try to use it somewhere else? And I think what we've shown in the program is that it does work outside of the academic research environment.
So this is a lot of times, I think that when we talk about that public health perspective and we talked about CDCs, it's all good and well to have screening guidelines. It's good to have different recommended, but if you can't bring people there and if you can't get them there, that is actually going to be really a futile. It's frustrating. I mean, it really doesn't happen, and we're really spending a lot of time seeing what works. So Lisa actually talked about that the evidence is showing that it's not just one evidence-based intervention, it's not just navigation, it's not just a screening reminder, it's not just having the test available and having that doctor-patient relationship that Sophie talked about, having that connection about what are the different types of options, putting in support for provider education, small media, different types of opportunity, really when mixed together, that's where we see the lift up for the screening rates. So that 80% in every community, that is a goal, but it's going to take all those supports that CDC has talked about with all the provider recommendations, knowing the screening guidelines, and to put it really all into play to really make this sort of difference. So huge thanks again, and then we're going to bring up Ann Zauber right now. So Dr. Zauber is a primary research focus is in identifying and assessing ways to prevent and reduce the health burden of CRC, incidence and mortality, specifically through screening and surveillance. Her work involves population-based statistical modeling and precision medicine to identify effective and cost-effective screening strategies in order to better inform health policy and randomized control trials. Dr. Zauber leads the Cancer Intervention and Surveillance Modeling Network Colorectal Group, a multi-center for microsimulation modelers sponsored by the National Cancer Institute. Her team conducted decision analysis for the 2008 and 2016 United States Preventive Services Task Force colorectal cancer screening recommendations on optimal age to begin and end screening, intervals, as well as the modality. She was a PI to the National Colonoscopy Study, a multi-center randomized control trial for screening colonoscopy and fecal occult blood testing. So I think a lot of times when we look, I think someone said this panel is awesome. This panel is awesome. We have the ACG. We have a fantastic physician. We have a leader in our public health agency, and we have a leader from the biostatistician, mathematic, and really looking at EpiWorld. And I'm really excited to have Anne also join us to share her perspective as well today on what the heck is going on with colorectal cancer screening and all the major initiatives. So Anne, please join us.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to talk to you about why age 45 to begin colorectal cancer screening. I know that many of you know that the recommendation was 50, and now they're saying 45, and there are probably many of you in the room that say, why isn't it lower? So I'm going to go behind the scenes and tell you about how these decisions were made. And I'm going to be using a fair number of figures. I don't have any jokes, so sorry. So we're going to be using the words evidence-based interventions. I'm going to be using the word microsimulation modeling, a few things. You can walk out of here and say, I'm a biostatistician. This is work that I do with the CISNET group, the Cancer Intervention and Surveillance Modeling Network, and I have co-authors for this particular work that we did with the American Cancer Society. So disclosures, I have no conflict of interest. I'm sponsored in a sense by grants from the National Cancer Institute or American Cancer Society. So an outline is to say I want to give you insights on evidence-based screening recommendations for colon cancer for average risk. So also I know that this group is no longer average risk, but the guidelines are set up for average risk that we're going to discuss now. A little background on the recommendations and the guidelines and some history behind that. I'm going to talk about how we use our microsimulation modeling to inform the guidelines committees, and also then to say what CISNET modeling was doing considering a younger age to screen, and then some about the issues and commentaries that have resulted. So you already know this. And you got it in your packet to talk about. Colon cancer is the second most common cause of death, cancer death in the U.S. The really exciting news that colorectal cancer deaths can be prevented by screening. And several committees have guidelines or recommendations for colon cancer screening. And the United States Preventive Service Task Force is the one that most recently, reported out in 2008 and 2012, I will probably call it task force rather than trying to say United States Preventative Service Task Force every time. There's also the American Cancer Society, and they also multiple society task force, which is based on gastrologists. So give you a little early history about the task force. In 1996, they put out recommendations to begin screening with annual FOBT or sigmoidoscopy or both beginning at age 50. And they were responding to randomized controlled trials, evidence-based medicine, of FOBT showing you could reduce colon cancer deaths by screening with FOBT. And there was one paper in 1993 and then two in 1996. So they had evidence-based to say with randomized trials that yes, screening makes a difference. So given that evidence, they then went on to put into their recommendations to begin screening. And I'll talk about 50 in just a minute. And then in 2002, they had a slightly different version. They again said age to begin would be 50, but they recommend the average risk patients would be based on being used based on the incidence of cancer above this age in the general population. They're giving you why they're starting at age 50. They're saying that age group plus higher would be the target. And they gave it an A recommendation, which meant that they thought there was good evidence for the prevention, and also that it would have a good effect. It wasn't just a little tiny effect, it'd be a large effect. And then in 2008, they said begin at age 50 and age to end would be 75. And this is when we came in to work with them. We were the first group to where they used a microsimulation modeling approach to inform their decision. It doesn't make the decision, but it's simply information that they use. And we gave the modeling results. Now, when we say begin at 50 and to end at 75, it means you start at 50 with screening. This is average risk. And if it's colonoscopy, you're going to have it at age 50, 60, and 70. If you're doing FOBT, you're going to have 25 FOBTs in your life, and all of them are going to be negative. And that's when they said to stop. Because if you've been screened from age 50 to 75 and they don't find anything clinically important, no adenomas, no colon cancer, then you're unlikely to be taken out by colorectal cancer. And so that was the reason for having an age to end. It doesn't mean that if you were 76 and you'd never been screened that you don't need screening. So that was a misconception that got people, sometimes when things get shortened, they get a little misrepresented. And then in 2016, we again worked with the task force, and again they ended up saying an age to begin should be 50 and age to end 75, but we also considered whether you would start at 45, 50, or 55. So for the American Cancer Society, they actually came out in 1980 to recommend colorectal cancer screening. And they had a sort of a different kind of model to be using for that, but they were recommending it by 1980. And then in 1992, age to begin at 50, but definitely to start, and that would be from the same results of the randomized trials, 1997, 50, 2002, 50, 2008, 50, and now in 2018, they are suggesting that you would begin at age 45. And they put that in as a qualified statement, but again, because we don't have as strong evidence for that as we do for starting at 50. So that's the newest, and that's what we're going to be talking about more. Also, the task force with my long-term colleague, Sid Winnower, had a paper in 1997 where from a GI point of view they were recommending colon cancer screening. That was joint with ACS in the same time period, and 2017 they again said start at 50 but with blacks begin at 45. So you've talked about lumpers and splitters. The lumpers are everyone saying screen, start at 80, start at 50. The new thing is shall you start at 45. So where's the evidence coming from? This is actually a graph from Sid Winnower's paper with Bob Fletcher showing, this is a graph showing, and I like graphs, so I hope you do. I am a statistician.
There's the joke.
Fight.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the incidence rate per age group for colorectal cancer. And this is from the SEER data from 1988 to 1992. And let's just look at it. This is just saying, okay, you start in 20s and it's low, and in 30 it's low, and 40 it's getting a little bit higher. But when you get to 50, it's accelerating. See how much it goes up? And also if you see way out here, someone who's not been screened at all is really, I can't make it stop here, but trying to get here, is really at high risk, so you definitely want to be screened. But let's just talk about it. That what do you see? You see this is escalating, but it really starts to escalate even more at age 50. So that is the big evidence to start at age 50 that we would think about back in this time period. So also, this is for average risk. What about people with family history? This is an excellent prospective study of family history and risk of colorectal cancer from Harvard. And they assessed the risk in family with groups that had no family history over age group, and with family history. And you see that those with a family history had a higher risk at the same age than those with no family history. So there's the estimate there to say that you should begin screening earlier if you have the family history. Again, prospective data, well-planned study, but this is the kind of evidence we had for the age to begin. You're not going to get a randomized trial. Someone starts screening at age 40 or 45 or 50. In the U.S., it's never going to work. People won't stay in their place, it's not going to be. So you're using these kind of information to say when should you begin. So you got this, where 50 came from. It's evidence. It's good evidence. It's working from the empirical data of SEER. You know SEER is from the surveillance and surveillance incidents and surveillance results. And there are registries across the country with putting in their incidence rates like what we had back here, all their data. And so it's well designed registries, And it's now spread to represent more than 10% of the population. Yeah, about it used to be only 10, but it's the U.S. standard data for what's happening in the incidence and mortality.
And can you say what empirical data is? Can you define empirical data?
Observed.
Observed data.
Observed data.
Okay.
Not my microsimulation data.
Okay.
Okay. But it's a study. It goes with the evidence-based medicine. So this isn't whoops. But either of these are empiric data. It's from well-known sources. It's documented, and you know that this many people had colorectal cancer out of the number that they were represented. Okay. So when are we going to use this fancy word, microsimulation modeling? And Doug Owen, who is a member in the past of the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, still on it too, he wrote in 2016 that you're going to use decision modeling, microsimulation modeling. You've got clinical questions that are remaining about how to target an empirically established clinical perspective at the individual program level, and I've got it in yellow, or when they're complex determinations of the magnitude of the net benefit overall or among important subpopulations are required. Net benefit, and that becomes very important in these recommendations. It is the benefit you get from screening and also the harm. Now, like what kind is a harm? Well, if you go for colonoscopy, there could be a perforation, there could be a bad reaction. The harm of the day before doesn't count, really, unless you use other statistics. But it's more than anything that there could be a perforation or for very, very few people, there are some complications. And the older you are, the more likely those kind of complications. So there's also the burden of time to do it, but things like that. So what they want to know is the net benefit. When you make an intervention, what's the life years gained relative to the resources required and also the potential risk of being a harm. So this is my GUI slide. When I show it to my biostat colleagues, they get all oozy. But y'all have been through a lot worse than that, so you won't be oozy. So the adenoma is considered to be the precursor lesion for colorectal cancer. And here's someone who had a colonoscopy, and this is a clean colon, okay? And there's nothing there, right? There's no polyp. This is a picture, not the same person, that has grown a very large adenoma, huge, really, really big. And some of these would go on to become this ugly-looking cancer. So what we want to do in our modeling is to describe how one would get from having no adenomas to having adenomas to having cancer, so that we could talk about how you might intervene. So if you'd found something that's a cancer, you all know you're going to have treatment. And so that would be the intervention. If you found this, you would take it out. This is called a pedunculated. See the pedestal and then the top? They would go here and get it right there and take it out. And you would remove that, and that bad guy is not there to go on to become cancer. So this is where you think about if we had a model that could say what's happening if someone ends up with having a full-fledged cancer, or whether you find this, or whether you are still at this stage of no puns at all. So what I do in microsimulation model, we simulate a population of 10 million, so microsimulation, and we have all sorts of different scenarios that someone does go on to get a cancer. What would be their course? What if we could find the adenoma at this age, or even this stage, or even smaller? So, and we could take it out. And what do you do if you still have someone that doesn't have anything? So we make a model this way. We've got a person with no lesion, and someone can develop one or more adenomas. And if an adenoma is developed, it can grow in size, and some can go on to become cancer, preclinical stage, and some go to clinical stage, and some, unfortunately, would cause death. So we talked about that you could intervene at this point with treatment. You can intervene with early stage disease for preclinical or to have an adenoma, and they can have an effect. So you've got your 10 million people, and they have their life story going from birth to death. Some people could die of colorectal cancer, some people could have colorectal cancer and die of a heart attack. So you put all that into the model. So about 30 to 50% of the U.S. population ends up developing adenomas, and it used to be 6% got colorectal cancer. Now that's no longer this high. It's around 4%, and around 2% were dying of colorectal cancer. So you have this model that goes through for multiple people, with some having always no lesions, some having adenomas, some having cancer. And then you putting over a screening lead. Y'all understand? Is that okay? So that's our model and our intervention. So when we worked with the task force in 2016, we performed the analysis and have a paper that was also published at the same time, Estimate of Benefits, Burden, and Harms of Colon Cancer Screening Strategies, and this is the modeling. Well, we have 3 CISNET models that are independently developed, but have some fairly different assumptions about how you go from that first adenoma to having it become a cancer. And then we use all 3 as sort of a test that we're getting the right answer. And 2 of the 3 models said start at 45, but one said that's not the best place, we should start at 50. So because they lacked empirical data, which we were talking about, to change the age to the beginning of, they left it at 50. So they're aware that maybe there could be a better effect, but they didn't have any strong data to show. So that is in 2016, and we did all the work for that in probably 2014, 2015, or probably writing it up in 2016. So that was the state of the affairs. And this is the kind of data that we would do. And I remember, I think the pattern of this, we could say heck, and so we'll say heck, this is a weird data, a weird figure. So this is the 3 different models, and what you're finding, you're looking at the life years that could be gained with screening, relative to the number of colonoscopies it would take to do that kind of strategy. So if you did colonoscopies every 5 years or 10 years, you're getting more and more colonoscopies, or if you only did it, every 15 years. And what you're looking for is where is a good balance between the benefit relative to the risk. And so in the past, it had been around 50. So this line here is actually of those people that would have begun at age 45. And it's sort of in a light line. You can see that in all 3 models, it looks a little better, and particularly in one of them, it looks much, much better. But again, that's modeling, and we did not have some data that could explain to us maybe this would be the right way. So we put this in here, it was published this way, and the task force said, interesting, but we're not going to go with it. So that was our modeling assessment there. So this, remember, came out in 2016. But then Rebecca Siegel at the American Cancer Society was looking at the SEER data, and she was breaking it up by age group. And she could see that for ages 20 to 49, the rates had been falling somewhat, and then they're increasing. This is going from 0 to 14 per 100,000, and this is going from 0 to 300. So these, in statistics, this would be, say, how to lie with statistics, because you've got a different rate here. So, but the point, if you try to put them on the same picture, the same figure, you would have the younger ages way down here, and the older ages way up here, and you wouldn't be able to see it. But the point is, in the younger ages, the incidence is rising. And in the older ages, it's declining, and we're assigning most of that effect to the ability to screen in the older population. So this comes out, and there's more that I want to show from Becky's work, because I think it's really important in understanding it. So this came out in, I think it was February of 2017, where it was in 2016 that the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force says it. So the task force didn't deny 45. They simply said we don't have data. This is the kind of data that we need. You see in the U.S. population rates where it's going up and where it's going down. So this is a really interesting, fun graph. I'm sure you love it. So this is colon and this is rectum. So I'm trying just like to be like Lisa. It's hard. It's hard. Okay. But this shows you, here's the younger age and here's the older age. So of course the older people start off with higher rates. But you can see both for colon and for rectum that over time, over calendar time, it's coming down. It's coming down, and we think it's because of the screening. But then look at the younger age. This is at the age 20, 30, 40, and the group that's a little in between 50 to 54 is showing up here that it's a little flatter, and that's probably because people don't go get their screening started at 50. You know, I can tell you I didn't go at 50, so anyway. But I was totally clean, but anyway. Okay, naughty, naughty. But that's the reason we think that's the explanation. There's not as much people going on there. So this is the data that we now have shown, and this is called an age period cohort. I already showed you on the slides for why we started at 50, that you're going to have a higher rate at the older ages for colorectal cancer. So you already know there's an age effect. And you were talking about 9/11, and that's what's called a period effect. That, you know, everything's changed because of a period. So that's what was meant by a period. Is a certain period. Is it World War II? Is it the Vietnam War? Is it, you know, something of that nature, or Agent Orange? Or you look for sometimes period because there'll be a certain part of your cohort that's affected over a certain time. So that's not what we're looking at. But we are looking at the birth cohorts to see what's happening. And you're seeing that with birth cohorts that you're getting this increasing risk in the younger ages. Okay, so this is another way of looking at it, and they're really quite interesting. This is, again, the scales here are totally different because you were in the 20s. So you can see, just look, this is in the younger age group, something that's different. That look at this for the older age, they're all falling. They're sorting out, and as you go over time, you're getting these dramatic drops in the incidence. But in the youngest age groups, you're going to get, this was the one that's flatter because we think that's when people are waiting to get screened. And then this is actually for rectal. You're going to see a similar issue of it's increasing, it's not decreasing. And if you look, you can see that in the age 20-year-old, it doesn't even start with going down. It immediately started increasing. So we are again worried about the increasing risk in the younger age group. They're just doing that same thing. Okay. Now this one's a bumpy slide because you don't have as many people having colorectal cancer in the youngest ages. But again, it's informative that this is the rate of colorectal cancer for age 50. And then it goes up because when you do start screening, you will see more early detection, so it looks like a bump, but it's going to come down. And this is the rate for age 45. So right here, it's around 30. And in the 1993 or so, when a lot of these things about age 50, it's about that the way too. So the age-specific incidence is about the same for a 45-year-old in 2015 as it was for a 50-year-old in 1993, about 30 per 100,000. So this is where we are thinking that the 45 is now at the level that they had been before when they said this is where you start screening. The increase in the annual percent change for adults age 40 to 49 was 1.3%, and that's twice that of adults age 50 to 54. It suggests that the risk for the younger cohort will continue to carry forward into the next age group. So it goes going off. So what happened after the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force published in 2016, the American Cancer Society said, we are also looking at updating our recommendations. And they wanted to look not only at average risk, but they wanted to look at men and women, black and white. And so they asked us to do our same runs that we had done for the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, to do the exact same plan, but to do it with race and gender. And at the same time, or right after we had finished that analysis, was Becky Siegel's data coming in, and they said, oh, just add that in. Well, that was not so easy to add in, but we then went ahead and used the age period cohort analysis that showed the strong cohort effect of increasing colon cancer for younger age groups. So we incorporated that new elevated risk. And it was a little tricky to do so, but I'm also going to show you what we did. We used the date, we're going to use we're saying that in the past, the colorectal cancer rates had been declining overall and then back up again. And we had set our numbers based on people from, not my original data in the natural history was based on the data from 1975 through 79 when there was no screening. So what we ended up doing was we took the 1935 cohort, which was age 40 of 1975, and we said that was one, and then we said that we wanted to know what happened if someone was born in 1975, how much higher that would be for someone that'd be 40 and 25 in the year 2015. So we just used that as a multiplier and multiplied all our rates up. So this is it is an approximation. So we don't have, because we don't have the cohorts going forward up to age 75 yet in the people that are now 40. So this is the way we have done the calculation, by going back in time and saying that's what we had established for the rates in the past, but we have to go up, and by how much are we going up? And we're going up with like another 60% higher. And as a cohort effect, we're assuming that the current 40 years old will carry it forward. So this is, again, my lovely graph that I love. And we're looking at life years gained by different categories of strategies and the number of colonoscopies required. Now, why are we using number of colonoscopies for harm? We are not allowed to use cost. The task force cannot use cost, and so American Cancer Society is not using cost. So that's the reason you don't have it that way. But what you see here is the 40, if you start at 45, where's my number? 45 to go to 75 with 10-year intervals for colonoscopy, you're here. Can you could it go there? It's trying to, it'll come there in a minute. But it's actually higher on the curve than if you started at 50, because you're getting more life years gained by beginning at age 45. And you're doing it in a sense and using just a little bit more colonoscopies to do so, but you're also getting more life years gained. So there's the balance between you get more life years gained even though you're having a few more colonoscopies to do so. It's a reasonable increase. It's about the same degree of efficacy of using the colonoscopies as it was with the 50, given that there's higher numbers for 45. So here's to show how we end up showing that. So same thing. So it also shows you, this is where we looked at men and women, black and white. This happens to be white females and black females as an example, but you can see that the line here is with the higher risk beginning for early age of onset than what we'd been using before, both for men, for whites and for blacks. So we are addressing a higher risk in the population than we had before. So this has been based on the increase in young onset colorectal cancer incidence using a screening initiation age 45, and it does have a favorable balance between screening benefits and burden. So there are pros and cons for this, and in the ACS paper with first authors Wolf and Bob Smith, a senior author, what were the pros that they were doing by going to age 45? Well, the early detection and prevention benefit for adults age 45 to 49 would be real. And it also, they felt, would bring in the higher risk minority groups, such for African Americans, already being suggested to start at age 45. They might be able to get in more easily if it wasn't, a special, we have to remember about a different group, just make it 45. And then we also felt that there'd be a favorable impact on colon cancer incidence and incidence-based mortality in that age group 50 to 54. Instead of thinking, well, you should start at 50, they say start 45, so those people, if they're going to wait 5 years, they're getting in at 50, but that should help. Not stated in the Wolf paper, but what I've heard in public is they expected this to cause an increased clinical awareness of even earlier age of colorectal cancer. I talked about the risk-benefit and the incidence of colorectal cancer, even with that 60% more on, it's still much lower than that if you'd had someone that was 50, 60, 70. So what we need is the clinicians to be aware that colorectal cancer should be on their differential diagnosis, and that at least they could evaluate a patient to do a fecal immunochemical test so that you want to create a greater awareness that there is a younger age of onset in the general, rather than saying everyone at age 40 or 35 or something should be getting colon cancer screening. So we mentioned the pros, and there have been several commentaries right back saying, hey, this is no good. And it was called Potential Intended and Unintended Consequences of Recommending Initiation of Colon Cancer Screening at age 45 years. I know every single one of those authors except one who have now met. So I was a little surprised, but that's look, this is what you do. You talk about the data, you talk about the policy, and let's see about it. So what I did here was I took all the most of the commentaries, and let's look at them. They say changes may cause confusion to the best course of action. Well, that would be education for both to providers and to the public. There's a lag between publication of this recommendation and the insurance coverage to start age 45. Well, we need to educate the insurance carriers. How are you going to get the insurance carriers to cover it if you don't show them the data, right? So I've already gotten like that. Well, what insurers? Well, we just published it, and so, you can't get the insurers to change the rates until they read the paper, They say there's not sufficient endoscopy services in the U.S. to do this. Well, in the Wolf and Smith paper, they specifically quoted Denaba Joseph's paper, where we did modeling to show that it was going to take a while to get the whole U.S. screened, whatever. So, and there is endoscopy capacity. Oh, okay, I know, I'm almost done. Sorry about that. I hope I'm not too late. Okay, so, help. They say it's going to increase the screening disparities because they're going to be left out. And there'll be diversion of resources to a lower risk population, meaning the younger ages, we should stay with a minority population or an older population. So our absolute risk level, or is it relative risk? Is it the level that we started with before, or are we going to say, well, you want the relative risk to climb and climb? They're saying there's cost, but yes, there's also benefits for life years gained and productivity. And this is a big one, lost opportunity to study the screening effectiveness in young adults. Well, we know you're not going to get everyone screened at the same time. You've got time to get your resources going, and indeed that's what we're doing right now. And then the actual benefits may fall short of prediction. Well, yeah, they could be, and you monitor that. You want to know that. That's, is it working? So I guess I was a little confounded by the pushback because yes, there could be unexpected consequences, and you monitor it, and you then work on it. So, all right, and so we say the age 45 is the new age 50, and this is the last one. This came out when the ACS came out with their recommendation. It was June 1st. 2017. It was the first day of Digestive Disease Week, which is mighty important. And this is a quote from David Lieberman, who was the incoming president for AGA. And he says, look, we know it's the second leading cause of cancer. We know that cancer rates are rising in the young people. And then he says, since patients in this age range have not been previously routinely screened, the ACS recommendation is based on modeling. We've got to put a push in there. Now we need to analyze the outcomes of early screening to identify which patients will benefit most. So that's the point. You can start with the policy and move with it and really monitor it. We have to monitor it, and we have to figure out if it does work. So this was just early in this week. Jane Brody had this column saying to get screened, and I can tell you that I didn't understand this figure at all until I could see it at least in color. So anyway, that's the colon. Thank you. I'm sorry I went over.
So here's the bad news. We only have 10 minutes for questions. No, because this is fantastic. So for Sophie, for Anne, and Lisa, a huge round of applause because this is an amazing panel. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I just want to connect Fight CRC to some of these initiatives so we're also clear on how this all is working together. Couple things. The National Colorectal Roundtable convened a discussion around 45 versus 50. So here's the thing. I think as we're catching up to speed with insurers, the modeling, getting our science, getting everyone working, ACG, all of our groups, the discussion has been there is no harm at all in having a discussion at least at 45 so people know their risk. Average risk, high risk, it really starts driving that conversation. Anne talked about that unintended, maybe not quite spelled out, but I do think from a public health strategy, there is consensus that we are moving in this way, that on time, we talked about that cohort effect. Some of the biggest increases are people 45 or at that 50 age point, right? So we've seen a slow uptake when it's at 50. So if we at least start talking at 45, then we'll actually see at least on-time screening. We're really working on the policy issues related to informing USPSTF guidelines. One of the things that we had done during the time Fight CRC had written to USPSTF saying, take into consideration Becky Siegel's new incidence mortality data when you think about the next uptake. That is actually a lot of the advocate side of the show that really helped ACS also consider that consideration as well. We worked with Ann, we worked with the ACS as many others, just as we are with USPF to include and think about that approach. Fight CRC, big time, working with CDC around the implementation of CRC CP, connecting, and it doesn't matter what guideline it is. If it's ACG or if it's ACS or ACS, there is more in common than there's not. And the thing is, if we don't get people there, it doesn't matter what guideline it is. We just have to get people into screening, knowing your risk. That opportunity for screening is huge. So I want to just say that I think there's a lot of synergy, there's a lot of real connection. There's a little bit of divergence, but there's actually an opportunity for us to do a lot with that, and that's where the passion and the drive really hits. So we have a whopping 10 minutes. Angie Davis is going to start right now, and we have 5 minutes. Okay, go ahead. Who are we going with first?
Real quick question about the statistical modeling. Does it make assumptions about the stage of diagnosis? Like in what we know about how long adenocarcinoma in the colon and the rectum take to develop?
Yes. It's a natural history model considering and we use the incidence rates and the staging that occur, and we also then use the relative survivorship of if someone was stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. That's all modeled in, and because of the microsimulation model, you get a variation as to someone might be, living longer than they predicted, because it's always average. It's not average. It's a whole variety of different survivorships, but we use published data, evidence-based data, empirical data.
Good morning. My question is for Dr. Sophie and probably Dr. Lisa. My son was 18 when he was diagnosed with colon cancer, and he died when he was 22. My daughter just got screened in September at the age of 9, but I got a lot of pushback from the gastroenterologist who consulted with an oncologist, a pediatric oncologist, who told her that they didn't think Kaylani needed screening because she was too young. And so, I had to persist. I had to send her information about the recommended screening guidelines. I printed off peer-reviewed journals, articles. So her colonoscopy was clear. What would be the follow-up for her? Because I never heard back from the gastroenterologist, and I didn't call her because I'm looking for a new one. But what would be the follow-up screening? What would be the screening recommendations for Kaylani moving forward?
That's a great question. I'm so sorry about your story and your loss, of course. I am an adult gastroenterologist. I will say that the recommendations for family members who have a first-degree relative with colon cancer screening is 10 years before their first-degree relative was diagnosed. So, her age makes sense, certainly. I think it would be important to know more about your son's tumor, and if there is a genetic mutation component that would help inform, how frequently your daughter should be screened. But I do think, getting a second opinion, of course, is paramount, and seeing exactly what their justification was for her not wanting to be screened, and, some more information about your son's actual cancer, I think will be extremely helpful. Oh, lack of knowledge. Yes, I mean, generally in the absence of any mutations, we still say at least 10 years before, and then if there are mutations, then that will tell us how frequently someone will need to be screened thereafter. But at least for adults, we definitely say 10 years before, regardless of what the mutations suggest, and then the frequency with which they're screened will depend on those things. But I mean, definitely, that speaks to trusting your instinct, and if you feel like what you're hearing is not accurate and you are educated in some of those things, it's important to seek somebody else's guidance.
Yep, we have a question over here.
This question is for Dr. Richardson. First of all, I want to thank you for probably working in one of the most frustrating places that we think of on earth, and that's we want things to move quickly, and we appreciate what you're doing. I just wonder, how long does it take, in all honesty, for these changes to happen? Like, I know we think about cost effectiveness and research, but have we ever considered making a fit test part of an annual physical? Because we know how much money that would save everybody involved if we were, this is just part of your standard of care. How long does it take for things like that to happen? Because, we're here to try to speed stuff up, but we're not unrealistic. And we do understand the things you guys have to go through to get things done.
So to start, thank you for your compliment. I do have loss of enthusiasm every now and then, but not usually. I've been there 20 years, so I'm still good. So to answer your question, there are probably people out there doing exactly what you just said, and I'll bet you some of our programs are doing it as well. One program out in California, the Flu Fit, where you get your flu shot and your fit test at the same time, that's really what you're talking about. The biggest challenge is everybody doesn't want to fit, so you got to deal with that as well. But yeah, it's a great idea. How quickly would it happen? Gosh, I tell you, you can't trust people like me, providers, right? So that's why systems change is the way to go. Your brain is only so big, and that really is why we went that way, because we got to change the system. I mean, the best systems we found that do the screening, every single person in the clinic is trained to ask the person, have you been screened for colorectal cancer? The person at the front desk, the receptionist, the nurse assistant that does the blood pressure, everybody asks the question, and everybody looks at the medical record to sort of catch. And those are the ones that just go through the roof and maintain, the higher screening. So yeah, that's a great idea.
With the underserved communities, though, because you say California, what about like underserved communities where they don't have access to that regular health care?
The biggest challenge there is, like the elephant in the room, is if you have a positive fit test, you need a colonoscopy. There's several, we heard of a couple of outstanding examples at the roundtable last year, one in South Carolina in particular, with this one physician, and it only takes one person to make a difference. Don't believe what people tell you, right? But this one gastroenterologist in South Carolina now has an entire network of gastroenterologists in South Carolina who will do fit tests on people without insurance. So there's a network. But it's all, these types of things, from up here to down, it's really grassroots and getting things moving from the bottom up, what you guys do.
We have a question. We have a question. So here's the thing. We have a whopping 1 minute left. I know all of you have questions. I want those of you, because we're not going to get to them all, frankly, write down your question right now. We are going to actually be having more conversation throughout the year with Fight CRC, with our advocates. We're going to have our leaders with us, but I want you guys to write it down. If you don't get a chance to see one of these folks later, give it to Reese, Angie, Sharon, or myself. We will make sure your questions get asked. Make sure we don't want to lose it. Marcia?
Just why is a sigmoidoscopy still considered a colorectal cancer screening tool when it doesn't explore the entire colon? And is there any movement to not have that be a screening tool?
Because there are a lot of left-sided polyps that are found compared to right. When we think about the colon and divide it into right and left, the concerning polyps on the right side are those flatter polyps and can be more concerning generally. But the left side, that's where most colon cancers do occur, and that's where polyps are found. So it is thought to be, still an acceptable screening modality, but as I had mentioned very quickly during the talk, is that's why it is complemented with FIT oftentimes to catch things that might be missed on the left side.
Perfect. And we're going to give Angie Davis the final word, and then we're going to have to transition, unfortunately.
Okay, great. And I'll be swift, Aubrey. So thank you to the speakers. Definitely write your questions down. We'll collect them. If we get a break, some of our speakers will be with us for the rest of the day so we can revisit some of these questions. But I do want to just kind of take it back to what you're here for. You're going to be on the Hill tomorrow. We're going to ask for $70 million for the CDC. It's incredible.
70 million.
$70 million. $70 million for the CDC. I want to underscore how important that is. That's a number that we came together with consensus with other partners so that we could fully fund colorectal cancer screening programs at the state level in all 50 states. Right now, we don't have all 50 states covered. So when you hear about this, when you ask questions about health disparities, you ask questions about system change, how fast can the CDC go? As fast as we can give them money. So they can't do all these things we'd like them to do with limited budget. And so when you meet with them and you're meeting with your members of Congress, and we're going to be talking to a member of Congress, we need to remind them how important the CDC is to systems change, to public health efforts at the local level. Andy and I both started at the local level, starting statewide screening programs, even though Andy was funded and I wasn't. I'm just saying. She got a lot more people screened than I did. But what I will say is that without CDC programs at the state level, I had nothing to leverage. So I couldn't go to my State Department in South Carolina and our partners in South Carolina to say, look at what the CDC programs have said are evidence-based programs. We can do it in South Carolina with possibly private funds or state funds. That's why it's so important. It's not just about your state getting the funding. It's other states being able to learn from you. So I get fired up about this because I know at the state level it is critically important for public health people to have these funds and to have the research published, because Ann Zauber says this all the time, publish, so we know what's going on and that people can be successful from that. So that's my last word.
Perfect. So thank you to Mary Louise, Sophie, Ann, and Lisa, and we're going to close this, this session up with a big round of applause. So thanks, everybody.
And that was a very tough act to follow. But it is my pleasure to introduce to you this morning Congressman Jamie Raskin. So Congressman Raskin represents the 8th Congressional District of Maryland. So where are Marylanders in the House? One. That's awesome. We got one. So Congressman Raskin was recently sworn in to his second term in the U.S. House of Representatives. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee, the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, the House Administration Committee, and the House Rules Committee. So he's a very busy guy, so we're very grateful that he could be with us today to spend some time with us. And so please join me in welcoming Congressman Raskin.
Hey, thank you so much. Well, good morning, everybody, and special good morning to my constituents who are out there. Hello. And we'll gerrymander the rest of you guys in for next time. But I'm delighted to be here with the coalition. I'm thrilled so many of you have come to lobby. It's important, it's urgent, and it's going to be really effective. But I was invited to say a few words about my own experience and to talk about it, and then, maybe to close with some thoughts about your lobbying this week. I remember back in 2010 when I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. I found this essay by Susan Sontag, who wrote that everybody is born with two passports, and one passport is to the land of the healthy and the living, and the other is a passport to the land of the sick and the dying. And we'd like to think that we're going to use just one passport in our life, but everybody's going to use two at some point. But I remember when I got through my experience, it was about a year and a half, a little bit more, and I did my final chemo sessions, and I did everything. I did surgery twice, I did radiation, I did chemo. But I remember when I finished it, feeling like I'd actually come back from a foreign land that I'd been somewhere else. So that I hadn't really traveled anywhere, but that I'd been in a different place. And but I vowed to myself that I would never forget what it's like to live over there every day, wondering about what's going to happen, and just struggling to get your medications together and figuring out how to put it all together. So I view it as an elementary and urgent act of democratic solidarity for people who are doing well, always to remember that there are people who are sick every day, and that we've got to stand together between the healthy and the sick. So, I'm also, in addition to being someone who's been through this, I'm also the representative for Maryland's 8th Congressional District, which includes NIH and the National Cancer Institute, as well as the Food and Drug Administration, as well as NOAA. So I believe in science, okay? And I'm a big champion of science. And, you know, one of our great Maryland scientists, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I don't know if he's got any fans out there, but he said something that always moved me, which is that the great thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it. That it's sort of the obverse of the point that was made by a story that I once learned about the great physicist Niels Bohr, who had some people over his house for dinner, and the people were leaving, and one of his guests looked up above the door and saw a horseshoe, and she turned to him and she said, "Niels, here you are, like the greatest physicist of the 20th century, and you've got a horseshoe above your door. What's that all about? I never really took you to be the superstitious type." And then he said, no, I'm not superstitious. They say it's true whether or not you believe in it. So, but anyway, I've been defending science ever since I got elected to office. I took office in 2017. The very first bill that came to us when I was elected was to cut the NIH budget by $5 billion, which was the administration proposal. And the very first speech that I made on the House floor was against this proposal to dismantle NIH funding by $5 billion. And I got up and I said, you know, how is it possible that in the wealthiest country that's ever existed, at our wealthiest moment, when we're spending you know, more than $700 billion in defense, that we would be dismantling money for the research into the killer diseases of our day, the illnesses that affect us all, breast cancer and colon cancer and cystic fibrosis and multiple sclerosis and malignant narcissistic personality disorder and, you know, all of the diseases that are threatening the republic, you know. Anyway, what was great about that experience was that we organized across regional lines, across party lines, and we were able to convert a proposed $5 billion cut into a $2 billion increase in the NIH budget. And we've never stopped organizing for it, because the truth is that our people are at least as afflicted and threatened by all of the diseases of our day as we are by terror cells, whether it's Al-Qaeda or the white supremacist groups that just committed the slaughter in New Zealand or what have you. The truth is that our national security, meaning the safety and the health of our people, is threatened at least as much by the diseases that are a plague on the land as we are by the terror cells that are operating in different parts of the world. So a new budget was just released, a proposal which, again, dismantled a lot of funding on Medicare, on Medicaid, on health research, on science, and again, with record increases in defense spending far beyond what was even requested by the Secretary of Defense. And so it is essential to go to Capitol Hill to tell your representatives that your security as a person, your security as a family and a community are all threatened by virtue of colon cancer, and we need the research into how to cure it and how to treat it. And these are beatable diseases. We're making tremendous progress, and with the right resources, we can get through this stuff. And cystic fibrosis, I was just out there at their foundation not long ago, but really fantastic progress is being made and can be made with the proper allocation of resources. Meantime, on the Oversight Committee, we had a hearing where we discovered that there are $150 billion in funds that went into the Pentagon that are completely unaccounted for, and nobody can find them in terms of waste and fraud and abuse and diversion, and nobody knows where it is. $150 billion. Imagine what that would mean in terms of the search for cures, the search for treatment for all of these diseases. I think that these are questions that relate not just to science, but in the final analysis, they relate to justice. And I'll tell you why. It's something that I learned going through my experience as a patient. I was in the Maryland State Senate at the time, and while I was doing my chemotherapy, I was serving, and I was the lead sponsor and the floor leader for marriage equality. This is back in 2010 and 11. Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? Remember when we used to discriminate against gay people in getting married? But so we were fighting to open marriage up, and so we, after several years, we finally had the votes, and I had been excusing myself every other Friday, and I don't know how many of you guys are in the same regimen I was, but it was every other week, and then I would be in the hospital for, I think, 3 or 4 hours. Then I would wear the belt. You guys have a belt for 48 hours for the weekend. What was it? Was that like FU 46 or F? Yeah. I thought it was the best named medicine of all time. 5 FUs, right? Yeah. So, but anyway, but I would, and I would come in, and I was wearing the belt, and the guy who sat next to me, who originally was opposed to marriage equality, his name was Jim Brochin from Baltimore County, but he ended up voting for it. But he used to say that I was wearing my belt just to get sympathy from the other senators to get votes for the bill, which was partly true, I suppose. But anyway, we finally put the majority together. We had the votes, and then we had the vote on marriage equality. And when you're the floor leader, after it's all over, you get to make a little speech. And it was there were hundreds and hundreds of people there. It was this very emotional, cathartic moment to have passed this. And so I got up and I made a speech, and I thanked my colleagues for being patient, for rearranging some of our debates around my sessions and stuff. And but I said that I had learned something in the process, which was the difference between misfortune and injustice. Because if everything's going great for you in your life, and you've got a wife and kids and a family you love, and you've got not one job but 2 jobs you love, and great constituents and everything, and then a doctor tells you you've got stage 3 colon cancer, it's a misfortune. It's a terrible misfortune, but it can happen to anybody, and we can't forget that it happens to people every single day where people get a diagnosis like that. But if you get a diagnosis like that and you can't get health insurance because you lost your job, or you love the wrong person, you can't get married, or you're just too poor to get it, that's not a misfortune. That's an injustice, because we can do something about that. And life is hard enough with illness and accident and injury and heartbreaks and everything that goes along with just being human. Life is hard enough that the government's role cannot be to compound the misfortunes of living with the injustice of denying people the care that they need and the resources that they need to get through it. We live in an extraordinary time where we are making miraculous progress scientifically and technologically and economically. We need to organize our society in such a way that we've got health care for every person who lives in the United States of America. So I know that there's a great agenda this week with very simple asks, the Removing Barriers to Colorectal Cancer Screening Act, which everybody should get on board for, the $70 million for the CDC in the colorectal cancer control program, increasing funding to the NIH to $41 billion, including $6.5 billion for the NCI. You guys have all of the talking points, but go in there and tell them your story and make sure that most of the members aren't around because we're on recess, but get the names of the staffers. Say you want to follow up, you want to get a commitment from the member to vote for it. Say you're staying in close touch with them. Tell them you're a big supporter, or you'd like to be a big supporter of the member, and you hope that they're a big supporter of this agenda. And all of this stuff is stuff that we can get done. I'll close just by telling you the story about my very first race for office, because when I ran, I was like a super duper underdog. I was running against a 32-year incumbent who was the president pro tem of the Maryland Senate. And I ran because I read an article about the incumbent who was blocking marriage equality and who had introduced a bill to dramatically expand the death penalty in Maryland. And so I said I was going to run. And so my favorite story is when I first announced, the Washington Post had an article quoting a pundit about the race, saying that Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible. And then 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote. And then they had another article quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. Okay, so I went from impossible to inevitable in a 9-month period, because the pundits are never wrong. But I like to tell that to especially my friends and my fellow patients in the colorectal cancer community, because our job is to take what seems like an impossibility, which is a cure for everybody getting through it successfully, and turning it into something that's inevitable. And we can do it. Thank you guys so much.
Great. Well, thank you, Congressman Raskin. We appreciate it. So I know we had a couple of Marylanders in the House. If you're still here, if you want to head out to the lobby, you can snap a quick picture with the congressman before he heads back to his very busy day. And if you won't mind just joining me in another round of applause, thanking the congressman for being here. And now, I know we've talked pretty much all morning at you, so now it's time for a little break. So get up, stretch your legs, and we'll be back shortly.
I am April Gardner. I am from Birmingham, Alabama. I am strong. I am a stage 2 colon cancer survivor, and I am blessed. I fight for young adults who are diagnosed with colon cancer, who are unheard, overlooked, and misdiagnosed. I hope that more young adults are taken more seriously when we go to see the doctor, that our age is no longer a factor when it comes to the symptoms that we're having, that we're heard.
We're going to welcome Sean Greminger of Families USA, Stephanie Krenrich of American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, and then Molly McDonald, who you've already met. So go ahead and come on up, y'all. And just as a side note, we're going to have everyone give a presentation, talk over a lot of what's going on at the Capitol, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So they'll be up here ready to answer any of your questions you may have. Hopefully have 15 minutes for Q&A, but we'll also have scheduled at the end of the day a Q&A with Molly and Stephanie to really go over any last questions you have, and that's technically scheduled for an hour. So we have plenty of time for a Q&A regarding policy and advocacy by the end of the day. So we're going to start first with Sean Greminger, again, Senior Director, Federal Relations for Families USA. And I'll just read Sean's bio. He's a very compelling presenter, so I can't wait to hear what he has to say. Sean is Senior Director of Federal Relations at Families USA, where he oversees engagement with Capitol Hill and the administration. Sean is a recognized national expert on key issues impacting Medicaid and low-income populations, including Medicaid disproportionate share hospitals and other supplemental payments, state financing of Medicaid, including Medicaid provider taxes, and the 340B drug pricing program, which provides discounted outpatient pharmaceuticals to safety net providers, including community health centers, AIDS clinics, and eligible hospitals. Before joining Families USA, Sean served as the Director of Legislative Affairs for America's Essential Hospitals, which represents more than 325 large hospitals and health systems, including public and safety net hospitals across the country. In this role, he led the association's efforts on Capitol Hill to support enactment of the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, and later directed efforts to defeat legislation to repeal the ACA and impose unprecedented cuts to the Medicaid program. Please welcome Sean Greminger.
Cool, thank you. Thank you very much, Aubrey. When Aubrey said that I was a compelling presenter, what she means is that I tend to make snide comments about members of Congress and Capitol Hill, which is not necessarily a great thing to do if you're a lobbyist, but I don't know, I just have a hard time not doing it. So I'll try not to say any snide comments about any particular members of Congress, and I'll just sort of generalize. Very pleased to be able to come up and speak to all of you. Looking forward to hearing from my other presenters. My role, as I understand it, is to sort of provide the broad overview of where things are on Capitol Hill, what we think is going to happen in the next couple of months, and then maybe a little bit of a sort of eye on the future. And then some of my colleagues are actually going to get into greater specificity than I'm comfortable with. So, 2019 on Capitol Hill. As we said, we're going to talk about near-term opportunities for legislation, mid-year possibilities, year-end action. I want to talk a little bit about Medicaid work requirements, because it's something that is sort of the key thing that's happening in the Medicaid world right now, something Families USA is working on, something that I think impacts a whole lot of folks, and then a little bit about sort of what 2020 and the future looks like. So, near-term opportunities. The first area where we are seeing some action, and this is, I think, a really good piece of good news for consumers, is on surprise bills. So, does everybody know what a surprise bill is? I think you've probably experienced them at one point or another. It's when you go to the hospital or another service provider, and you think, gosh, I'm insured. This is going to be cheap. And then it turns out that one of the people who provides care to you, maybe it's an anesthesiologist, maybe it's oncology, it's not as big a deal, thank goodness. Maybe it is an emergency physician. Oh, shoot, they're out of network. I got a $10,000 bill for going to the emergency room for an hour to have them take a look at a corn on my foot or something. And it's $10,000 and you're stuck with it. So this is a problem that affects a lot of consumers. Something like 40% of consumers have had a surprise bill in the last 5 years. And it's something that we are really trying to get rid of. So we actually, I think the great news is we're having some real bipartisan action on this. In the Senate, Senators Cassidy and Carper, that's Cassidy of Louisiana, Carper of Delaware, have been working on legislation. They introduced a bill last year. They're reintroducing this year. Senator Hassan from the great Granite State, I think it is, Live Free or Die, New Hampshire, has also introduced legislation. And we're finally starting to see the committees of jurisdiction in the Senate, the finance and help committees are starting to take action. Right now, we're still very much in the sort of talking to stakeholders, getting back and forth, but I think it's something we may actually see get across the finish line. The key issue here is actually not should we hold consumers harmless. There seems to be bipartisan agreement on doing that. The key issue is really a fight between industry. So on one hand, the question, right, is if I go to the hospital, I get a surprise bill, somebody's out of network. The way the bill would work is, okay, Sean, you only have to pay whatever your in-network copayment would be, $200, $500, whatever it is. But then the question is, how does the rest of the payment get worked out? The insurers want to pay as little as possible, and the providers want to get paid as much as possible. And so that's really what the fight is what is that sort of set payment rate or negotiated payment rate going to be once you hold the consumers harmless? It's a pretty big fight, and one that I think we're seeing play out sort of behind closed doors. If we're lucky, we'll see it play out, in front of the cameras because it's exciting and fun. But I really do think and hope that this is one that we can get over the hump and actually get some real protections for consumers. The second area, and one that is getting a lot more attention in the popular press, of course, is on prescription drug pricing. So there's the way that at least House Democrats are sort of thinking about approaching this is two separate packages. So first is what they're calling the low-hanging fruit. These are bills or policy concepts that have bipartisan backing, that have been around for a while, that although there are certainly people who oppose them, probably can get through the House, through the Senate, to the President's desk, and the President is prepared to sign them. There's something called the CREATES Act and then something called Pay for Delay. These are both going after some real abuses of the patent system that brand name drug manufacturers have used. So in Pay for Delay, these are mechanisms by which a brand name drug manufacturer actually pays their potential generic competitors not to produce a drug. So instead of having competition, like we like, and bringing down the cost of drugs, we literally just would say, hey, I'll give you $2 million a month if you just don't compete with me. That's legal, believe it or not, but it's not going to be legal much longer, hopefully. The second one is the CREATES Act. This is actually in the biologics area. Under law right now, Congress mandates, just checking my time here, Congress mandates that if you're producing a biosimilar, a new biologic, to compete with a brand name biologic, right? So it's going to be basically a generic biologic. The brand name has to actually share some of the material that they use to create the biologic, right? Biologics are actually made from living material as opposed to just a chemical compound. They have to share it with you so that way you can reproduce it and you can have a competitor on the market. But brand name drug manufacturers are doing everything they possibly can to keep that from happening because the longer they're in a monopoly, the more that they can continue to charge folks. So the CREATES Act would put a real stop to that practice, and it would actually allow for some pretty substantial financial penalties if brand name manufacturers continue to do that. So these are two bills, bipartisan support. I actually think they're going to move. It's very exciting, but they're not a silver bullet, right? They're taking care of a couple of particularly flagrant abuses, but they're not really dealing with a lot of the underlying issues. The second piece is what I'm sort of calling long-term table setting. Democrats have sort of talked about this as their trying to think about what the term is that they use, their sort of premier thing that they want to run on in 2020. I will say, the drug negotiation, or excuse me, the drug pricing issue is one that sort of cuts across party lines. Democrats tend to be more interested in doing prescription drug reform than Republicans, but by no means is that universal. There are plenty of Republicans who want to do it. There are some Democrats who don't. And President Trump is like in completely different places with the rest of the Republican Party, or most of the rest of the Republican Party, which is also kind of fun to watch because most Republicans are in the place of like, leave it alone, we're getting a lot of donations, just stop. And the president is like, oh my God, let's do something. I work for Families USA. If you know anything about Families USA, you know that we don't agree with the president on much, but on prescription drug pricing, we actually tend to have a lot of alignment with him. So it's exciting to actually have a president who wants to take this seriously. The place that Democrats are really focusing on is Medicare price negotiation. So right now, if you are Pfizer and you came up with a new, wonder drug, basically you can go to Medicare and you can say, I want to charge $2 quadrillion a month, and Medicare says, great, let's do it. $2 quadrillion a month. What this would allow is for Medicare to say, no, I don't think I want to do that. I'm the biggest purchaser of drugs in the country. I want to negotiate with you to bring down that cost, just like any private insurer would do. And right now they're banned from doing that. The question is not whether Democrats want to go in the direction of doing price negotiation. They do. The question is, what is the hammer? How do you force pharma to the table? Because you can't just say, I want to negotiate with you, and farmer says, don't want to negotiate, $1 there it is, final offer. You have to have something to force them to the table. So that's where the big debate is going on within the Democratic Party right now. Everything from what's called competitive licensing, which would basically, if you listen to sort of the conservative talking point, is it's theft of intellectual property. Basically, they would say, we're taking your patent, we're taking your drug, we're going to license it to a generic manufacturer, and we'll just pay you royalties on it. So that's fairly confiscatory, but we actually support it. All the way to, there are some Democrats who are talking about, well, we'll just ask really nicely and see if that works. And of course, there are other Democrats who disagree with it. So that's a big fight. I expect that part of the conversation is going to wrap up in the next 3 to 6 months. And Democrats will actually move some sort of Medicare price negotiation package through the House of Representatives. It will go absolutely nowhere in the Senate. Mitch McConnell is not interested. But it will set up for a sort of big debate on drug pricing in the 2020 election cycle. Finally, another sort of area is, as I mentioned, Families USA actually does see eye to eye with the president on a lot of drug pricing issues. He has a rebate rule, which would fundamentally change the way in which these sort of strange drug rebates work in Medicare Part D and Medicaid, which we don't particularly love, and potentially could actually bring down the cost of drugs, although there's a real interesting question of whether or not it will happen. I think you talk to 20 experts, they're all going to disagree on exactly what the impact of the rebate rule is going to be. And then finally, there's this area called international reference pricing, which at least some Republicans, including the Trump administration, have some fondness for. The idea is, we don't want to set the price of drugs here in the United States. We don't feel comfortable doing it. But what we could do is we could just lean on other countries that have already done this. So let's take a market basket of like 5 big countries: England, so Great Britain, Germany, France, Spain, and Hong Kong, for instance. And figure out what their average price is for these drugs, and that's what we're going to sell it at in the United States. It's an interesting concept. It's one that we generally support. It's one that most Republicans hate, but the Trump administration likes. So again, fun to watch. Near-term opportunities. Mid-year opportunities. These are, I would say, my confidence level on this slide is a lot lower than on the previous slide. The sort of stuff that's happening now, I can tell you what's happening now, and I can tell you roughly what's happening. This is all sort of maybe it'll happen. It's really unclear. So there is an interest by a lot of folks to try to do something about, the cost of health insurance in the United States is really expensive. What can we do about that? The tough thing is that this was a huge fight last year when market premiums were spiking. Now they're still super high, but they didn't actually go up a lot in the last year. And so the sort of political pressure to do something around about the cost of health insurance is not really there. So there is some work in the House Energy and Commerce Committee on some legislation that we support, but I'm not sure that it will be, that it's going to make its way all the way through. In the Senate, Senator Lamar Alexander, the chair of the Senate Health Committee, has put out sort of a RPB for ideas. And on cost containment, it's sort of your guess is as good as mine as to what cost containment means. Is it cost containment for consumers, or is it cost containment for the federal government, or is it cost containment for insurers or drug manufacturers, et cetera? But a lot of folks have weighed in with him, and I think that is going to be sort of their focus in the Health Committee. And then finally, the last one is sort of opioids 2.0. I'm sure all of you remember there was significant legislation that moved through last year. Although, as I like to say, it was a 300-page bill that contained almost no funding. It was really kind of remarkable that you can spend that much money on paper without actually doing anything. But there it is. So this bill, it actually did do a number of sort of interesting changes in the opioid space. I'm just not confident that it's actually going to do enough to overcome what is a very significant problem in the United States. We at Families USA and many others have said, hey, you should follow that up with something that actually has funding to maybe help people get treatment for, opioids addiction. And Congress, of course, has no interest in doing that because they don't want to spend money. So we're pushing. I'm not confident, but I put it on there because I feel like it's my job. All right, year-end action. So one thing that I have a higher degree of confidence in this because this is sort of on the calendar. At the end of the year, fiscal year, there's always sort of what people call an extenders bill. Programs that are expiring, funding that is expiring, that Congress needs to act on. The nice thing about these things is they often can be legislative vehicles. So there's a couple of big things they got to do, and then often Congress will jump in and say, hey, let's do this at the same time. Let's just drop it in there. And this is potentially, I know there's legislation that you guys are interested in that Stephanie's going to talk about. This is potentially a legislative vehicle that one might use. So at the end of the year, funding for community health centers, they got a big payment bump under the ACA. That funding ends. Funding for the National Health Service Corps, Medicaid disproportionate share hospitals see a pretty significant cut to their reimbursement. All of that happens on September 30th. There will be a bill. I don't know what it's going to say. I don't know how much money's going to be in it, but we know it's going to happen. I'd like to say that I know it's going to happen by September 30th, but the last time we had one of these was 2 years ago, and what should have happened by September 30th didn't happen until February. So sometimes these things take a little bit of time. But that is going to be sort of the big legislative package at the end of the year, and one that I know that we're going to be focused on. Medicaid work requirements, very quickly. Generally, under the Medicaid program, the expectation is that you don't necessarily have to work to qualify for Medicaid. And most people who are on Medicaid are not necessarily people that you would expect to work. Half of people on Medicaid are children. Unless we support bringing back child labor, that's not necessarily one that we want to promote. Something like 45% of the spending in Medicaid is for people who are disabled, some of whom do work, but most don't. But there is increasingly, particularly with Medicaid expansion, a larger number of folks who are, at least theoretically, sort of able-bodied adults who potentially could work. Frankly, most of them already do. But there's an increasing movement within the Trump administration to basically require people to work or engage in some other community activity as a benefit on staying on the Medicaid program. All of these states are states that have applied for waivers which would allow or require Medicaid work requirements within their state. I've highlighted two of them, Arkansas and Kentucky, because those are particularly interesting examples. Arkansas is the only state in which Medicaid work requirements have actually been put into effect. The result has been exactly what you think it would be. A lot of people are getting kicked off of Medicaid coverage. And increasingly, as we're watching this happen, a decent number of them actually are working. Because believe it or not, if you qualified for Medicaid in Arkansas, you have an income of less than 138% of the poverty level. That's 18 grand, right, for an individual. You know the types of folks who are making 18 grand? There's a good chance they're working hourly. There's a good chance that some months they get 45 hours a week. Other months they get 25 hours a week. Well, if you fall under 30, you lose Medicaid coverage in Arkansas. So Arkansas, we've already seen thousands of people lose their health care coverage, including a lot of kids. In Kentucky, they haven't yet put it into effect, but actually we got a stay, and there is an ongoing court case that could very well decide the future of Medicaid work requirements. It's exciting. I'm not a lawyer, actually, believe it or not. The first trial, the judge said, yeah, Medicaid work requirements, not going to fly, don't do it. Of course, it got appealed. It's now at the next level, and the judge is going to be ruling on it by the end of this month. If he, and then of course it will go through, could end up going all the way up to the Supreme Court, but if he ended up striking it down, then Medicaid work requirements would probably be illegal across the country. But as you can see, the stakes are pretty high. If Medicaid work requirements go into effect and are considered legal, you can see there's a lot of states where this could happen. And beyond that, the Trump administration in their budget last week actually proposed universal Medicaid work requirements so that all 50 states and the territories would have to have work requirements in their Medicaid program. All right. Hold on, I'm just checking. Okay. Don't worry about that. We're going to get to that in a second. So 2020 and beyond. So the big exciting thing that everybody is talking about in DC, whether we want to or not, I was talking to Stephanie about this. A lot of us don't want to talk about it, but we're sort of being forced to, is Medicare for all. Very strong interest in the Democratic Party on this. I'm going to keep this very brief. Typically, the way that health policy sort of is developed is the really smart kind of health policy intelligentsia work on ideas, and then that sort of gets floated up into the presidential campaigns, into the DNC, into the RNC, and ultimately the people who are running for president have a they have a policy that sort of meets where kind of the center of their party is. That's not happening this time. So right now you have the health policy intelligentsia who tend to be fairly small c conservative who are like, this is a terrible idea. And you have the grassroots in the Democratic Party who think this is a great idea. And increasingly the folks who are running for president, and pretty much 2/3 of the Senate and like half the governors are running for president now, they all are supporting Medicare for all. And so it's sort of a scary time if you're a progressive working on health policy because it's sort of difficult to figure out where you are. I'll say from Families USA perspective, we're trying not to pick a side on this one. We're trying to help bring the groups together. We see this as sort of the next generation of how do you get people covered. But I do think it's going to be a real interesting challenge. Our hope is that the Democratic Party doesn't just explode because they are fighting so much over this issue. But you will find as you go up to Capitol Hill, this is if you're talking to a Democratic member of Congress, particularly a Democratic senator, this is what they want to talk about because this is sort of the exciting new thing. Last thing I will say, and I said this last time, I think actually when I spoke to a similar group in Baltimore back in, I think it was November, December. So Robert Mueller, you may have heard of him, he's going to be coming out with a report, you may have heard of it. It could happen as early as this week or sometime in the next month or two. I don't know what it's going to say. I clearly have no inside information on this, but there is a reasonable chance it may say that people at the very highest levels of the administration, including the guy at the very top, may have done some really bad things. And that could start a impeachment conversation in a more serious way. I'm not saying it will, I'm not saying it won't, I'm not rooting in either direction, but what I am saying is that for those of us who care about everything else going on in the country, the press, the Hill, they're not going to want to talk about it. All they're going to want to talk about is whether or not we should impeach the president. I think we have to sort of be prepared for that and think about, as advocates, how do we sort of work through that and say, hey, while we're sort of in the middle of deciding what the future of our democracy looks like, can we also maybe change Medicare policy to allow for colorectal cancer screening? It's going to be a challenge that we all have to face, but I do think it's important to talk about. So that's everything I've got, and I look forward to answering questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you. Interesting stuff. I'm sure that people will have a lot of questions immediately after this panel and then later on today. Good stuff. So we'll pull up Stephanie Krenrich next from American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I'll just read over her bio. She's the Director of Federal Relations with American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. And in this role, she develops and executes strategy to ensure that federal legislation, regulation, and other initiatives promote access to preventative services and quality, affordable health care for people with cancer, survivors, and those at risk for cancer. Her primary areas of focus are Medicaid, Medicare, private health insurance, and patient navigation. Prior to joining ACS CAN, Stephanie served in the Policy and Advocacy Department at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and worked for several members of Congress, advising them on legislative issues. So welcome, Stephanie.
There it is. Okay, good. Hi, I'm Stephanie. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm very excited to talk about the newly reintroduced Removing Barriers to Colorectal Cancer Screening Act. So thank you for having me. This is a very exciting day. Okay, how many of you are familiar with this bill? Okay, most of you, or half of you probably. I think we probably have half and half new advocates and then some veterans, right? Does that sound right? Okay, sounds good. So what I'm going to do today is, there we go. What I'm going to do today is just kind of talk through what the bill does, kind of where we are with the bill right now, and what we expect coming up. So this bill, the Removing Barriers to Colorectal Cancer Screening Act, it was just reintroduced, like I said, in the House and the Senate. And what it does is it, right now under Medicare policy for certain folks in Medicare, when they go in for their screening colonoscopy, right? Like they don't have symptoms, there's no reason they're going in, they're just doing what they should be doing, right? And getting preventive screening for colorectal cancer. When you go in for a screening colonoscopy, there's an understanding, due to the Affordable Care Act and kind of what was put in there, that there will be no cost sharing, right? However, if when they're getting their colonoscopy, polyps are found and removed, it converts that procedure to a diagnostic procedure, and that means that they would have a 20% coinsurance, which is really expensive, especially if you're a senior on a fixed income. And we certainly don't want, low-income seniors to have bills up to $350 for a screening colonoscopy. So it's something that we're concerned about, and as is, the colorectal cancer community as a whole. and something that we've been working to, along with Fight CRC and other folks, working to kind of try and get the cost sharing removed for a number of years now. So, so why is this important? Right? I think kind of the main points that I usually make when I go up to the Hill and talk about this, besides the fact that, you know, cost sharing is really one of the biggest barriers, one of the biggest deterrents to folks getting, you know, preventive screenings, right? So it's really, really important. So, and as you all know better than anybody, colorectal cancer can be prevented with screening. And according to an analysis that we had done last year, this bill could prevent 1,500 to 2,000 cases of colorectal cancer each year because of the polyp removal, which, as you know, can actually prevent someone from getting colorectal cancer, which is hugely important. And if colorectal cancer is caught early with screening, the survival rate is 90%. So it's really important. Right now, and in years past, we have lots of broad bipartisan support for this bill, right? You know, no one is really opposed to encouraging folks to get screened more for cancer. So this year, we actually have a really great kind of lead sponsor list in the House. We've got 4 folks. One is Congressman Payne from New Jersey, and his father passed away from colorectal cancer. Congressman Rodney Davis from Illinois, and I know your community is very familiar with him. His wife is a colorectal cancer survivor. Congressman McGeegan from Virginia, who's a colorectal cancer survivor, and Congressman McKinley from West Virginia, who was just really interested in this issue and wanted to help. So we're thrilled with our lineup of Maine, you know, Republican and Democratic sponsors this year in the House. And also in the Senate. We've got the same folks in the Senate that we've been working with for years on this. Senator Brown from Ohio, Senator Wicker from Mississippi, Senator Collins from Maine, and Senator Cardin from Maryland. And I will tell you, actually, I have so these bills were just introduced, I think, on March 7th, so a couple weeks ago. And now the co-sponsor list is actually at 134 in the House and 44 in the Senate, which is like unbelievable. So obviously you all have done a really incredible job over the years of telling folks what this bill does and why it's important. Yes, give yourselves a round of applause, it's a big deal. But what we're gonna do tomorrow is we're gonna get like tons more on the bill, right? So, and I know that Fight CRC has a goal of 80% of new members on the bill. So I don't know, I have a lot of faith in you guys, and I think you can do it. So I think tomorrow's gonna be really important in terms of like getting support back up, getting awareness back up, and making sure people know that this bill is back, and we're gonna move it this year is our hope, anyway. So that's what's happening with that. Lots of folks support this, not just ACS CAN and not just you guys. We have about 30 groups on a support letter that we're circulating right now for the bill. So groups from all across, kind of senior groups, cancer groups, colorectal cancer groups. So we really have kind of a really nice coalition of folks who want to see this happen. So another kind of avenue that we've talked about in the past that's kind of on hold for the moment is whether or not the Trump administration or the administration has the ability to fix this. And I know we've worked closely with Molly and Fight CRC on kind of conversations about this. You may hear about a letter that was circulated in December 2018 from 52 senators where they asked the administration, and I know that kind of Fight CRC and some other groups had sent a follow-up letter in February, sort of seeing what if the administration could take action on this. So it's an idea that we have out there. We have no idea if they'll be able to do it, but it's something that we've pursued in the past. But I think right now we're really concentrating on getting bipartisan sponsorship up in the House and the Senate and kind of seeing what we can do congressionally. So, so yeah. And I think, Aubrey, do you have a question or? Oh, okay, we'll take questions at the end. Okay, well, anyway, that was my fast overview of the colorectal bill. All right.
That was great. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, you definitely have a lot of information about it now. So we're going to finish up with Molly, our policy analyst for Fight CRC. And Molly is, you've seen her before. Do you want me to read your bio? I would love to read your bio. She's already been introduced and spoken before, but I'll just read her bio quickly. Molly McDonald serves as the policy consultant for Fight Colorectal Cancer. Molly is a principal at the government relations firm Winning Strategies Washington, where she works with clients from across the healthcare sector to creatively tackle their most pressing policy challenges. Prior to joining Winning Strategies, Molly spent 5.5 years working for Congressman Leonard Lance of New Jersey, a senior member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Molly served as Congressman Lance's senior health policy advisor, working on issues related to the Food and Drug Administration, health insurance, drug development, and medical research. In this role, she worked closely with patient advocacy organizations, pharmaceutical companies, physicians, and health plans to build coalitions to successfully move policies through the legislative process. Molly also supported the congressman's work with the Deadliest Cancers Caucus, helping to educate, advocate, and develop public policy to improve the lives of patients suffering from cancer. Molly lost her great aunt to colorectal cancer. Molly currently lives in D.C.
Thanks, Aubrey. And I also appreciate the fact that when the slide was first created, it said Molly McDonald, BA, because the others on the dais have advanced degrees. And while I am very proud of my bachelor's degree, I don't think we need to highlight it here. So thank you for that, Aubrey. Okay, so Stephanie gave a great overview of the Removing Barriers to Colorectal Cancer Screening Act, sort of our main legislative priority for our Hill Day tomorrow. And so I'm going to now go over our funding asks. So we have a number of really important federal funding priorities, oh boy, that I will walk through here shortly. Do I need to, where am I pointing it? Okay. It's going to be fine, guys. So I wanted to start out with sort of kind of laying the groundwork with appropriations and sort of the federal funding process. So there's a difference between appropriation and authorization. Authorization is sort of the first step. So that's legislation that really sort of sets the policies and says, you know, this is how much money should go to a certain program. So that's a completely separate process. Appropriations, on the other hand, is basically how Congress writes the check, how they get the money out the door. So in this case, we're going to be focusing on the appropriations process. And so something that you might hear on the Hill tomorrow is that right now we're in the sort of thick of appropriations season. So appropriations season typically starts around February or March and spans all the way through September. And so this is when, you know, Congress goes through the process of making the decisions of how to allocate your tax dollars. And so something that some of our other speakers have mentioned is the president's budget request. So that is what really kicks off the federal appropriations process. So you guys are coming at a perfect time because the president released his budget request just last week, which is actually several weeks to almost a month later than typical. And not surprisingly, unfortunately, it didn't have a lot of great news in it for the cancer community. As you can see here, I've highlighted some of our main priorities and the funding levels that we've seen over the past year and what the president proposed to do. So you can see he's proposed significant cuts to the National Institute of Health, significant cut to the National Cancer Institute, and also proposed fully eliminating the CDC colorectal cancer control program, which Lisa Richardson talked about before. So I'll start there with the bad news, but the good news is the sort of adage in DC is that the president proposes and Congress disposes. So this is not a legislative document. It's not law. It's basically a wish list. And every president, whatever political party, their budgets typically get the same reception. Like, yeah, thanks, we appreciate it, but we're going to do our job now as Congress. So it's something that we definitely need to be aware of and that we need to consider. But I don't want you to think that this is what's going to happen, because there's already been bipartisan opposition to these numbers, and there's already been commitment to continue to move forward with the progress we've made in the past. So to just sort of dig in a little bit deeper into the appropriations process. So as I mentioned, it starts with the president's budget request, and from there it goes to the member requests. So in previous years, we've kind of missed that window, but because we had that little government shutdown, it actually delayed this process a little bit. So now we are here at really the perfect time. So each member of Congress sets a deadline for their office to receive appropriations requests. So from groups like ours, from all of their different constituencies, for them to say, this is the program we care about, this is the funding level that we want, and we hope that you support it. So each office usually has either a form, or now some of them are getting technologically a little bit more advanced and are setting up Google Docs. And to basically, it's very impressive. My former boss, God bless him, had a flip phone. So a Google Doc is really a big thing. That's basically a way where they can aggregate all the requests that they're coming in, organize them, and ultimately prioritize them for when they go to the Appropriations Committee. So that is the next step. Then the member takes all the requests that they've gotten in and they say, okay, these are the top 10, 20 that I think are the most important to me and to my constituents, and that's what I'm going to put forward to the committee to say, this is what I want you to put in the bill. The committee then goes through this very elaborate process where they make this big spreadsheet of all the members' requests and start to tally up, okay, so member X requested, $5 billion for NIH, but so did these other members, and starts to really pick out the themes and where the support is for different programs. And then from there, it goes through, or at least it should go through, what's known as regular order. We have not always accomplished that, and that is basically going through a subcommittee markup. So when an individual subcommittee that's focused on particular agencies, so one that's particularly important to us is the Labor, Health, and Human Services Subcommittee. So that's focusing on HHS as an agency. So they focus on that bill, talk about it, discuss it, vote on amendments, and then the same thing happens before the full committee. It's voted on the floor, and then it goes to conference between the House and the Senate. So the Senate and the House go through each go through this process. And so at the end, their bills often look different. So then they have to come together at the end in what's called a conference committee and duke it out. And come to an agreement, and then we're able to pass the bill, and it's all great. So what you've seen in the past is that process hasn't always worked that way. That's why we had a government shutdown for 36 days, I think it was. But members on both the House and Senate have remained committed to getting through this process through regular order and getting it done in a timely fashion. So Steny Hoyer, the House Majority Leader, has said that he would like this process to wrap up by June 30th. So a pretty aggressive timeline, but we're here for it. So getting into our individual asks, so Lisa Richardson's presentation could not have been more well-timed, and she can talk about this program obviously way better than I can. But we are asking, as Angie mentioned, for $70 billion for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Colorectal Cancer Control Program. Actually, it should be million. And so this is a very important, it should be million, sorry, that's a typo. We would love billion, but that is a typo, sorry guys. So this is obviously an incredibly important program for ensuring that we continue to expand screening rates, particularly in underserved communities. And so you heard this morning about all the great work that this program is doing, and so we want to make sure that it can continue. And so this is also important in the context of the president's budget, because like I said, he has proposed to basically, there's a number of different cancer control programs for different types of cancers, and he's proposed to sort of consolidate those programs into one and then significantly cut the funding. So it's going to be really important for us to tell our story about the importance of screening and why, you know, we've made great progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And so that will be very important. So our other ask is for the Department of Defense peer-reviewed cancer research program. And so the Department of Defense does additional medical research, which you may not expect. And it's really as a way to sort of complement what's happening at NIH. They do some of the more sort of out-of-the-box, innovative research that can really, really make a difference in the lives of cancer patients. And so the peer review cancer research program is basically a pot of money, and then there's about a dozen different types of cancers that can compete for that funding. So it can be tough to get on that list to be able to compete, but colorectal cancer has continued to be on that list, and so we want to ensure that they continue to be eligible for that funding. And then most of you, I imagine, are familiar with the National Institutes of Health. So we, also I'm realizing, I think the copy and pasting is wrong on this, but the other one is supposed to be $1 million too. So it'll be in your packet, the correct number, and I apologize for that. So the National Institutes of Health obviously does incredible groundbreaking research, basic foundational research that is key to a number of you know, the important developments in the cancer space and beyond. So you know, many of the drugs that you all are on, many of the treatments and screening modalities are based in research that started at the NIH. Over the past 2 years, we've had consistent growth in NIH funding. And we want to make sure that we continue that effort. So it's perfectly appropriate and appreciated by members for you to thank them for what they've done so far, but also to make sure to point out that that's not enough. 2 years of increases is great, but we need to make sure that we're continuing to increase at a steady and predictable rate so that researchers can worry about you know, finding cures rather than worrying about whether or not they're going to have funding year over year. And so within the NIH, there is various institutes that focus on different diseases. So in particular, obviously important to us is the National Cancer Institute. And so we want to make sure that while we have increased funding for NIH, that also translates into commensurate increases for the National Cancer Institute. So to make sure that money is focused on colorectal cancer research. And in particular, related to NCI, a new ask that we have this year is some report language related to early onset colorectal cancer. So report language is sort of a very DC, Capitol Hill term, but basically every appropriations bill has obviously all the line items of a budget. So NCI gets X dollars, NIH gets X dollars, but then there's also a section where the committee can basically state how they want that money to be spent. So for NIH and NCI in particular, there's not a colorectal cancer line item. Basically money is funded to the institutes and then the institutes decide how to spend it. So report language is one way that Congress can weigh in and say, you know, we appreciate your expertise as the National Cancer Institute, but this is something that we feel is important and we want to make sure that you're directing your research in that direction. So we are proposing to include the following language. The committee notes that while overall colorectal cancer incidence rates have been decreasing over the last 20 years, there has been an increase in adults ages 20 to 54. The committee urges NCI to research why rates of colorectal cancer are increasing for this population. As part of this research, the committee encourages NCI to expand its knowledge of the natural history of the disease to help advance the development of improved screening modalities and treatment. Further, the committee requests that NCI include colorectal cancer research, including research into early onset, in its strategic plan. So this is really making sure that we're getting our bang for our buck within the NCI. So we want to make sure that we are engaging with the Institute and pushing them to focus on things that are important to our community, and obviously something that has become a growing issue within the colorectal cancer community. So that is mostly my spiel, and I know it's throwing a lot of information at you, a lot of numbers, several of which had typos here, so that's not really helpful. But we will be handing out packets which will have the correct numbers, and we're also going to, later on, Aubrey and I kind of walk you through how do you talk about this on the Hill. This is a lot of kind of mumbo jumbo, but what's going to be really important is to be able to connect these programs, connect these dollar amounts to actual stories and to actually what's happening in real life. And I can say, and we'll get into this more later, but as a former staffer, that's what I want to know. I want to know how the words we're writing into a bill, the numbers we're putting in an appropriations bill, how that's affecting real people. And so that's something that, I can go to the Hill and talk about these programs, talk about these numbers. Stephanie and I do it all the time, actually, talking about the screening bill. But we are no substitute for you. And as many have said before me, you all are the experts. And so Aubrey and I will help you take your story and really put it into action. So, thanks.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you, everybody. So we have about 10 minutes for questions, knowing that we have plenty of time for questions later. We have some people with microphones to walk around the room, ready to get your questions. I will say that a lot of these numbers are in your binder, so if you're like, I didn't get a picture, there are copies of the issue briefs in your binders.
Hi, thank you. Any estimates on what the screening bill would end up costing? When we go up there, it's nice to say, yes, it might reduce 1,500, 2,000 colorectal cancer incidents a year. At what cost? It'd be helpful.
Oh, sure. So we don't have, I'm just going to kind of preface this with, we don't have anything official from the Congressional Budget Office that generally does kind of an analysis of bills and how much money they're going to cost the federal government. ACS CAN had put out had commissioned a cost analysis last year on the bill, and the analysis found that it would cost about $300 million over 10 years. If anyone has questions about that, I want you to feel free to send congressional offices my way. That's what our grassroots staff at ACS CAN does. I'm happy to talk about it with congressional staff to talk about exactly what that number means, because it's kind of a lot of, X, Y, and Z costs this much, and then X, Y, and Z saves this much. So feel free to just tell them it's an ACS CAN analysis that we did, and I'm happy to talk it through with folks. Is there anything else you want to? Okay. I mean, you do a really good job, Molly.
So this bill has been introduced many years.
It's the fifth time.
Yeah. Why? What is the main reason, in your opinion, that just can't get it through? Whether there's 41% or 80% or 90%, why? What is the main barrier that it's not getting actually? Because it's been bipartisan. We've had different administrations, so there's something that's blocking it. What is it?
So that's an interesting question. I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and then I want to pass over to Molly to see if she differs from my opinion. But anytime you're trying to pass legislation, there are a million things that go into what is going to help it pass. It's timing. It's what else is going on the Hill. It's what else is going on in the committees of jurisdiction. It is a really big deal when a bill passes, because there needs to be agreement from like a million different people, and they're all from different political parties, or they're Democrats and Republicans, and they all have to agree. So a lot has to come together to get something to pass. So I'm just going to put out there really quickly that it is hard to get a bill to pass. Also, I think that concerns about, so anytime you change Medicare policy, it's going to cost money. So a lot of Medicare beneficiaries, lots of money kind of goes into making some of these coverage changes and these kind of out-of-pocket cost changes. So I think concern about the cost may have been something that has held it up in the past. And that is only by way of saying if it's a bill that doesn't have any cost, it is more likely to pass than a bill that has a cost, right? But I think that over the last few years, we've done a really good job. Okay, I'm new, actually. I just started in May. ACS Can, Fight CRC, you all have done a really good job of kind of trying to get the pieces together that can help it move in the future, right? Like I think the cost analysis we did last year is really helpful to committee staff and folks in leadership so they have like a good idea of what we're talking about. We've got a nice coalition of groups that are supportive. Every year there's more and more bipartisan co-sponsors. So I mean, I guess that's just by way of saying it's a little bit of money issues and a little bit of just luck and figuring out the right levers to pull to get it to move. But is there any?
I would echo that. I think that's all very valid. Well, not valid, but accurate. I would just reiterate. So if we think back to way ago when Sean presented, he gave a very high level overview of what is going on in just the healthcare space, and that's just one sliver of what's happening on Capitol Hill. And so being able to find the time and space on the congressional calendar is just generally a challenge. And to get your issue to rise up amidst all the other things that are happening on Capitol Hill, it's always a challenge. And the other thing I'll just add is that, some members have a little bit of an aversion to doing things that are disease specific. And the challenge with that is some members look at it, if I do something for colorectal cancer, then I'm also going to have to do something for multiple sclerosis and cystic fibrosis and all of the other diseases and advocacy groups that are coming through their office at any given time. And so it can sometimes put members in a difficult position that they want to help everyone, but maybe can't. And so members, you may hear from them, even on some of the appropriations asks, that they won't do anything disease specific. So.
And I actually just have one more thing on that issue, and then we can move on. But there's something new, and I hope it's okay I'm talking about this, but there's something new in the House this year, where if a bill gets to 290 co-sponsors, it could get put on something called a consensus calendar. It's just another mechanism for maybe moving a bill if a committee hasn't taken action on it to get it to go directly to the floor. And I think that that's just another reason why getting co-sponsorship on this bill is so important right now. And getting it quickly so we can really kind of show early in the Congress how much support there is for this bill. So.
I have a really simple question. We may get to this later, but how do I know what my representatives and senators, what their position is on all of these issues and who might be more adversarial versus jumping on board with our cause?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have a list of co-sponsors of the screening bill, but I believe that's from the 115th Congress, which was last Congress. So as Stephanie mentioned, that bill was just reintroduced, so we kind of didn't have time to get it to print to let you know all the folks who are on it. But a very easy way to look that up on the fly is to go to congress.gov and type in the name of the bill, and it'll pull up all the co-sponsors. So that'll help you be able to go in and be prepared.
One last thing that I'll say about that is in your soapbox online and both the schedule you'll receive, specifically this bill, if they are co-sponsors, you'll be able to see that. They'll talk about that once soapbox arrives and you get your folders. So that'll be something we talk about too. We have probably time for one more question.
You good or you?
All right.
Thanks. If the CDC's screening budget's 48 million at the moment and the administration's pushing for 0, what's the economic rationale for us going for 70 and what's a realistic outcome?
So 70 is based on basically a number that is where the program would have been if there hadn't been cuts in the past. So showing, for inflation and growth year over year. I wouldn't look at it as 0 versus 70. The administration has proposed to consolidate that program, but in the past it has been funded at a level of about 43 million. And so I think that's sort of a more likely context. And we just look at it as sort of necessary growth for the program to continue to be able to fund additional sites and address the great number of folks that still are unscreened.
Can I offer a very quick piece of advice? It actually goes back to the previous question about where, where your member is going to be, in terms of a lot of the issues we talked about. One of the things you'll find with some members of Congress and some staff is that they sort of have their own agenda that they want to talk about. So I'm thinking, like, for instance, Medicare for All. Somebody may come in and be like, "This is so great! You guys should, you guys should totally support this." Or, potentially a office, a Republican office, being like, "Well, Medicare for All would end up killing thousands of people." The best way to handle that, because I get it all the time, is to look at them and say, "Wow, thank you so much for your thoughts. That is so interesting. I'm here to talk about colorectal cancer screening." Don't let them get you off your task. Go right back to it.
A perfect piece of advice to to end on. Thank you all. Can we have a round of applause for our full panel?